Hello beautiful people. Welcome to The Fiction Wizard. In today's episode, we explore Griphook's routine audit found Harry owned 7 stolen lordships, and named Dumbledore the thief. Hit like, subscribe, and join our community of story lovers. Let's begin. Chapter 1, The Ledger. The audit had been Griphook's idea, which was unusual, because Griphook's ideas were almost never charitable ones. He had been a senior auditor at Gringotts for 31 years, and in that time he had developed a professional philosophy that could be summarized in 3 words: numbers don't lie. People lied. Wizards lied with particular enthusiasm and creativity, spinning elaborate fictions about inheritance rights and family trees and the intentions of deceased relatives. But the ledgers, the deep ledgers, the ones written in blood ink on dragonhide parchment, maintained by goblin magic that predated the founding of Hogwarts by 6 centuries, those never lied. They couldn't. The magic wouldn't allow it. It was the deep ledgers that had first bothered him, 2 weeks ago, when the routine birthday audit had landed on his desk. Every Gringotts account holder with a noble house designation received a full inheritance audit on their 17th birthday. It was standard procedure, older than the bank itself, rooted in the ancient compact between goblin kind and the wizarding nobility. The audit confirmed what was held, what was owed, what was rightfully inherited. It was, in the vast majority of cases, tediously unremarkable. Griphook had processed 11,412 of them over the course of his career. He had been surprised by perhaps 6. The Potter audit had surprised him within the first 4 minutes. He sat now at his desk in the sub-basement offices of Gringotts, the tallest stack of parchment he had ever assembled in professional practice arranged before him with geometrical precision. The guttering lamp threw amber light across the columns of figures, the cross-referenced genealogical tables, the sealed testimony of 3 independent goblin bloodline analysts who had each, separately and without knowledge of the other's findings, reached the same conclusion. 7 houses. Griphook tapped one finger against the edge of the desk, slowly, methodically, like a clock counting down, and read the summary page for the 17th time. Potter, Harry James. Born July 31, 1980. Account holder since August 1, 1980, established by proxy guardian. Noble house designations confirmed by blood right, 1. Noble house designations suppressed, redirected, or rendered dormant by external interference, 6. Total noble house designations, legitimate and rightful, 7. See attached appendices A through G. Appendix G was the one that had made Griphook sit very still for a long time. He was not a sentimental goblin. Sentiment was a luxury he'd excised from his professional conduct decades ago. But he had a precise and powerful sense of honor, the kind that lived in the chest rather than the head, and when he had finished reading Appendix G and understood, fully and completely, the scope of what had been done, not by accident, not by oversight, but deliberately, carefully, over the course of 16 years, something in that chest had gone very cold and very hard. He pulled the sealed correspondence file next to the ledger. 14 letters, addressed to Harry Potter, intercepted before delivery by standing redirect order. The redirect order had been placed on the account on the 1st of August, 1980, the day after it was opened, and it had been placed by a proxy guardian acting under a power of attorney document that, when Griphook had finally dug it out of the archive, bore a magical signature he had spent 3 days verifying and re-verifying before he trusted himself to say the name. Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. Griphook folded his long fingers together and looked at the door of his office. There was a standing policy at Gringotts, not written, never formalized, but understood, that correspondence concerning the Potter vault, any queries about the Potter estate, any flags thrown by the Potter audit, were to be routed upward through the bank's liaison office, which then forwarded them to the office of the headmaster of Hogwarts. The policy had been in place since 1981. Griphook had always assumed it was a protective measure. He had never had reason to question it. He had reason now. He sat for another hour, reading nothing, simply thinking. Griphooks did not make decisions quickly. They made them well. When he finally moved, it was to take a fresh piece of parchment, dip his quill, and begin writing the most carefully worded letter of his professional career. Harry was eating a bowl of cereal when the letter arrived. It was a Thursday morning in late July, 19 days before his 17th birthday, and the summer at number 4, Privet Drive had achieved its traditional character of grinding, muggy misery. Uncle Vernon was at work. Dudley was presumably somewhere in the neighborhood performing the civic function of making smaller children cry. Aunt Petunia was in the garden doing something violent to the rose bushes with a pair of pruning shears, her back to the kitchen window with the rigid posture of someone who had decided, quite firmly, that the person in the kitchen did not exist. Harry didn't mind. He had grown accustomed to not existing at Privet Drive. It had a certain restfulness to it. He was reading the back of the cereal box, he'd read it so many times he could recite it, when the owl came through the window he'd left cracked open for exactly this purpose. It wasn't Hedwig. It was a Gringotts owl, small and bureaucratic-looking, wearing a sealed pouch around its neck that was stamped with the bank's crest. It dropped the pouch on the table next to his cereal with an air of professional detachment and immediately left without waiting for a response, which was unusual. Gringotts owls always waited for a signed receipt. Harry looked at the pouch for a moment. Then he picked it up, broke the seal, and pulled out the contents. There was a letter on top, written in the dense, precise script that goblin correspondents always carried, as if each word had been measured before being committed to the page. Mr. Potter, my name is Griphook, Senior Auditor, Gringotts Bank, London. You and I have met previously, though you may not recall the occasion. Harry did recall it, actually. First year, the cart down to the vault, the goblin who'd watched him with an expression of careful assessment that Harry had been too excited about the vault to properly notice at the time. He read on. I am writing to you directly, and privately, in what I acknowledge to be a departure from standard procedure. I wish to be transparent about this departure. There is a standing policy within Gringotts that all correspondence relating to the Potter account be routed through a third-party liaison before delivery. I have chosen not to follow that policy in this instance. I have enclosed the preliminary report of your 17th birthday inheritance audit, conducted as per the standard provisions of the Gringotts Noble House Charter. I would strongly recommend reading it in full before taking any action. I would further recommend reading it somewhere private. The full audit will be available for discussion at your convenience. I am available at Gringotts at any time following your birthday, or before it, if you choose to travel with appropriate discretion. There is one further matter I wish to raise directly, so that there is no ambiguity. The audit contains information which, in my professional assessment, constitutes evidence of significant and deliberate misconduct by a named third party acting as a proxy guardian of your estate. I have not yet reported this finding through official channels. I will not do so until you have had the opportunity to review the material and make an informed decision about how to proceed. This is not, I want to be clear, a matter of sentiment. It is a matter of goblin honor. A wrong has been done. The wronged party has the right to know. Griphook, Senior Auditor, Gringotts Bank. Harry read the letter twice. Then he set it carefully aside, reached into the pouch, and pulled out the audit report. It was thick, far thicker than he expected, bound in the standard grey Gringotts cover with his name and account number embossed on the front. He opened it and began to read. The first section was standard, covering his primary vault, its contents, the interest accrued since 1980. He skimmed it. The numbers were larger than he'd realized, significantly larger, but that wasn't what Griphook had flagged. He turned pages. The second section covered noble house designations, and it was here that the language shifted. The audit's tone became more clinical, more careful, in the way that professional language does when it is describing something extraordinary while trying to maintain its composure. Primary house designation, Potter. Status, active. Lord designate, Potter, Harry James. Secondary house designations. The list that followed was 6 items long. Harry read each one. He read the status beside each one: dormant, artificial suppression, and the date the suppression had been applied, and the name of the proxy guardian who had applied it, which was the same name, 6 times over. He turned to the appendices. He read for a long time, and the cereal went soft in the bowl, and outside Aunt Petunia's pruning shears went snick, snick, snick against the rose bushes, and somewhere down the street a dog was barking, and Harry Potter sat very still at the kitchen table in the house he'd grown up in and read about the life that had been taken from him before he was old enough to know it existed. Appendix A was House Potter. The suppression there was the most straightforward: proxy control of the voting seat in the Wisengamot, redirected income from the estate's invested holdings, letters and communications intercepted and redirected. It had begun 3 days after James and Lily Potter's deaths. Appendix B was House Black, and it was angrier reading. Sirius's will, written in Azkaban during one of his lucid periods in 1985, smuggled out through a sympathetic prison owl, legally valid under 3 separate precedents, had named Harry as secondary heir to the Black estate and, more importantly, as Sirius's designated ward with full guardianship rights overriding any prior arrangement. The will had reached Gringotts. It had been held in the liaison queue. It had never been actioned. Appendix C was House Peveril. This one Harry had to read twice and then go back to the front of the section to confirm he was understanding it correctly. The Peveril line, the line of the Deathly Hallows, the ancestral magical bloodline that the invisibility cloak was part of, ran directly through the Potters. It was not a secondary inheritance. It was a primary one that had been deliberately obscured in the public genealogical record in 1981, with the existing Potter genealogical documentation amended to list the Peveril designation as lapsed rather than active. The amendment had been made using a document authenticated by a proxy guardian's seal. By the time Harry reached Appendix D, which was House Gryffindor, his cereal bowl had been pushed to the far end of the table and both his elbows were on the parchment and his fingers were pressing against his temples. House Gryffindor, the actual ancient house, not the school dormitory, had a legal existence independent of Hogwarts, with an inheritance line that had been dormant since the early 17th century. Except it hadn't been dormant. According to the Audit's genealogical analysis, the Gryffindor line had continued through a cadet branch that intersected with the Potter family tree in the 15th century and had never been formally extinguished, only treated as extinguished by the parties managing the Hogwarts founding documentation, who had a vested interest in the name belonging to the school rather than to a living person. Harry sat back in his chair. He thought about the Sorting Hat putting him in Gryffindor. He wondered, with a slightly wild edge to his thoughts, whether the hat had known. Appendix E was House Slytherin, and it stopped him cold. He read it 3 times before he got up, filled a glass with water from the tap, drank all of it, and sat back down. The Audit's bloodline analysis had caught something that had apparently been invisible to everyone, or suppressed by everyone, for 60 years. Lily Evans Potter's maternal grandmother had not, as the public record stated, been a Muggle-born witch from Yorkshire. She had been the daughter of a squib from the Gaunt family who had married out of the wizarding world entirely after being disinherited, a woman named Meredith Gaunt who had taken her husband's Muggle surname and erased her origins with the thoroughness of someone who wanted very badly to be forgotten. The Evans line through Lily was, therefore, not Muggle-born at all. It was a Gaunt cadet line. And the Gaunt family were the last recognized descendants of Salazar Slytherin. Which meant that Harry Potter, who could speak Parseltongue, who had always wondered uncomfortably where that particular ability came from, was not just connected to Slytherin through Voldemort's accidental Horcrux. He was connected through blood. His mother's blood. He had a legitimate hereditary claim to the House of Slytherin. And Tom Riddle, who had murdered his way to the Slytherin lordship convinced he was the last of the line, had killed the one person in the world whose blood actually made her his kin. Harry pressed the back of his hand against his mouth and sat with that for a while. Appendix F was House Ravenclaw, shorter and less dramatic but no less concrete, another Evans bloodline connection, this one through a different ancestral branch, connecting to a Ravenclaw cadet line through the maternal side of Lily's family. 2 founders' houses through his mother alone. 3 if you counted Gryffindor through his father. And then there was Appendix G. Appendix G was House Emery's. Griphook had attached a separate note to the front of this appendix. It read, "This section required the involvement of 3 independent senior analysts and a review of the goblin blood record going back to the founding of the compact. The findings are not in dispute. The implications are significant." Harry read Appendix G with the peculiar mental clarity that sometimes came to him in moments of absolute shock, the same stillness that had descended on him in the graveyard at the end of the Triwizard Tournament, when the world had become too extreme for panic. The Emery's line, Merlin's line, had been assumed extinct for 9 centuries. It had not been. It had continued through a series of Muggle-adjacent families in Wales and the West Country, surfacing occasionally in the records as unexplained magical ability in children born to apparently ordinary families, until it intersected in the early 20th century with a family named Evans. The same family. Lily Evans Potter had carried, in her blood, the inheritance of 3 founders and the oldest magical line in Britain. She had almost certainly never known it. The squib grandmother who had fled the Gaunt family and buried her past had buried everything else with it. And Albus Dumbledore had known. The Audit's appendix laid it out with the merciless clarity of a goblin bloodline analysis that didn't care about feelings or reputations or the carefully maintained fiction of a great man's good intentions. There were documents. A private genealogical report commissioned by Dumbledore in 1977, 3 years before Harry's birth, that correctly identified the Evans bloodline. A letter, found in the Gringotts archive attached to the power of attorney document, in Dumbledore's own hand, that contained a single sentence which Harry read and then read again: "The Emery's designation must remain dormant. The boy cannot know what he is until we are certain he is what we need him to be." Harry closed the audit report. He set it flat on the table. He put his hands on top of it. He sat like that for a long time. Outside, Aunt Petunia had finished with the roses. The garden was quiet. The dog down the street had stopped barking. The house ticked and settled around him with its familiar summer sounds, and Harry Potter, Lord of 7 houses, heir of Merlin, son of a woman who'd never known the scope of her own inheritance, sat in the smallest bedroom's nearest neighbor, the kitchen, with 19 days left until his 17th birthday, and thought. He wasn't angry. Not yet. Or rather, the anger was there, he could feel it like a banked fire behind his ribs, the slow-burning kind that would be around for a long time. But the dominant sensation was something cleaner than anger. It was the particular sensation of a lock turning over inside him, of something slotting into place that had been out of alignment his entire life. All those years of feeling like he was missing something. Of feeling like the pieces of his own history didn't quite fit together the way they were supposed to. Of wondering, in his quieter moments, why the wizarding world treated him the way they did, the prophecy, the chosen one narrative, the constant push and pull of being positioned and repositioned on a board he couldn't see, all of it suddenly made a horrible, geometric kind of sense. He wasn't a weapon Dumbledore had found. He was an inheritance Dumbledore had stolen and then used. Harry picked up Griphook's letter and read it again, particularly the last line. "A wrong has been done. The wronged party has the right to know." He turned the letter over and picked up the quill Hermione had insisted he keep on the kitchen table for writing down thoughts you need to process. He'd always thought it was a slightly annoying idea. Right now, he was grateful for it. He wrote, "Griphook, I've read the audit. All of it. I'd like to meet in person as soon as possible, and I'd prefer it happen before my birthday rather than after. I also need to know whether you can arrange for this meeting not to appear in the standard Gringotts communication record, not yet. I'll explain when I see you." Harry Potter. He blotted it, folded it, and then sat looking at it for a moment before adding a postscript, "Thank you for sending this directly. I think you know what it would have meant if you hadn't." He addressed the outer envelope and stuck his head out the back door to whistle for Hedwig. The response came back the next morning. Griphook wrote with the economy of someone who had already said what needed to be said and now merely required confirmation of logistics. Mr. Potter. Tuesday, July 25th. 9 a.m., use the staff entrance on the east side of the building. the door with the copper owl above it. Give your name to the clerk at the lower desk and say you're there for a vault consultation. You will be brought to me. The meeting will not appear in the standard record. Gringotts has its own channels for confidential audit consultations. We use them rarely, but we use them correctly. Griphook P.S. Do not bring anyone who reports to Dumbledore, intentionally or otherwise. Harry stared at the postscript. Then he put the letter away and spent the rest of the day thinking carefully about who he trusted and why. It was a strange exercise, when you approached it honestly. He started with the people he'd always considered his own: Ron, Hermione, Sirius. Ron had never, as far as Harry could determine, had any agenda except friendship, sometimes infuriating, occasionally thoughtless, but never strategic. Hermione had Dumbledore on a pedestal roughly the height of the astronomy tower and had built much of her moral framework around his example, which meant the audit was going to hit her like a structural collapse. She'd need time to process it, and processing it would either break her or strengthen her. There was no middle ground with Hermione. Sirius. Harry thought about Sirius for a long time, about Appendix B and the will that had been held in the liaison queue for 12 years, about Sirius raising him as he should have been able to raise him, about all the years in Grimmauld Place and all the years before that in Azkaban. He thought about what Sirius would do when he read it. He thought about whether that would be a problem or an asset and decided it was probably both. He wrote to Hermione and Ron separately. He asked them to come to Grimmauld Place as soon as they could manage. He kept it short and didn't explain why. Hermione would worry, Ron would trust him. Then he wrote to Sirius, and that letter was the hardest to write, because he was the one person Harry most wanted to protect from the contents of that audit and the one person Harry had absolutely no right to keep it from. He wrote, Sirius. I've had some news from Gringotts. It's about the estate, mine and yours, actually. I need to show you something in person. I can be at Grimmauld Place by Sunday if I can get out of here. Can you arrange transport? Don't go through Dumbledore. That last line was the important one. He looked at it for a while, thinking about whether writing it was jumping ahead of himself, making accusations before he had the full story, burning a bridge before he'd finished reading the map. Then he thought about what was in the audit, and he left the line as it was. Getting out of Privet Drive without Dumbledore's knowledge was not, in the end, particularly difficult. The Order of the Phoenix members who took turns watching number 4 had a rotation Harry had long since memorized from the window of his bedroom. Mundungus Fletcher, whose watch ran from midnight to 6, was almost never actually present for his shift and was therefore simple to account for. Tonks, who ran the Monday morning watch, was a different matter, but Harry had learned over the previous 2 summers that Tonks had a blind spot around the back of the garden and could be relied upon to be facing the wrong direction if you moved quietly. On Saturday morning, at 5:30, Harry walked out of number 4, Privet Drive with his trunk shrunken in his pocket and Hedwig's cage over his shoulder and all 7 sections of his inheritance audit folded against his chest, and he did not look back. He caught the night bus on the corner of Magnolia Road. Stan Shunpike was asleep in his conductor's seat when Harry banged on the door, and blinked awake looking confused and then vaguely resentful until Harry gave the destination, Grimmauld Place, or as close as was possible for the bus given the Fidelius, and the combination of a significant tip and Harry's particular expression, which was the expression of someone who had recently read something that had reorganized his entire understanding of his own life, persuaded Stan to keep the journey quiet. The bus lurched and shrieked through sleeping streets, bouncing between geography with its usual reckless enthusiasm, and Harry sat in the back and watched London's pre-dawn darkness pass the windows and thought about 7 houses and the documents tucked against his chest and the exact sentence Dumbledore had written in 1977. The boy cannot know what he is until we are certain he is what we need him to be. What we need him to be. Harry pressed his forehead against the cool glass of the window. Need him to be. Not what he is. Not what he deserves to be. What we need. The distinction was very small and absolutely everything. He had always been, to Dumbledore, a resource. A necessary element. He understood that Dumbledore loved him, after his fashion. He didn't doubt that. The love was real. It ran through every memory of every kind word, every lemon drop, every twinkle of eyes over half-moon spectacles. But love and use were not mutually exclusive, and Dumbledore had loved him the way a careful craftsman loves the tool he built for a specific purpose. With pride. With care. With an absolute unwillingness to let that tool become something other than what it was designed to be. The bus hit a particularly violent bump and Harry's head bounced off the glass. He straightened up, pushed his glasses back into place, and made a decision. He was going to stop being someone else's design. He was going to start being his own. Grimmauld Place was dark when the bus dropped him a street away at 6:20, and Sirius answered the door before Harry could knock, which meant he'd been watching for him. Sirius looked. Harry noticed this immediately, better than he had looked in a long time. The gaunt sharpness that Azkaban had carved into his face had softened over the past year, filled in with regular meals and sleeping in a proper bed and the simple restorative power of being free. He was wearing a dressing gown over what appeared to be yesterday's clothes, his black hair loose and tangled, and he looked at Harry on the doorstep with the expression he always wore when Harry arrived, that particular complicated brightness that was relief and love and a complicated species of guilt all layered together. "You came alone," he said. "Yes." "And without telling Dumbledore?" "Yes." Sirius stepped back and held the door open. "Well," he said, "I've had the kettle on for an hour. You'd better come in." The kitchen at Grimmauld Place smelled of tea and the lingering ghost of last night's dinner, and Sirius sat across from Harry at the long table with his hands wrapped around his mug and the expression of a man bracing himself for impact. Harry pulled the audit report from inside his jacket and set it on the table between them. "This is a Gringotts inheritance audit," Harry said. "The one that runs when you turn 17. Except mine was done early because, it doesn't matter why, the goblin who did it found something significant and decided I should see it before my birthday." Sirius looked at the report without touching it. "What kind of significant?" "The kind where you should probably finish your tea first." Harry. 6 stolen lordships, Sirius. On top of the Potter one that was already mine. 6 more, all of them suppressed using a power of attorney document signed by Dumbledore 3 days after my parents died. Harry kept his voice level. "Including yours." Silence. Sirius's hands had gone very still around his mug. "The black designation is in there," Harry said. "You wrote a will in Azkaban in 1985. You named me as your ward, full guardianship rights, overriding any prior arrangement. The will made it to Gringotts. It was put in the liaison queue." He paused. "It's never been actioned." The word that Sirius said then was not one that Creature would have approved of, though Creature would likely have agreed with the sentiment. "There's more," Harry said. "You should read it. All of it. There's a section about my mum that, I'd rather you read it than I explain it, because I still don't entirely trust myself to explain it without losing the thread." Sirius reached forward and pulled the audit toward him. He opened it. He began to read. Harry got up, poured himself a cup of tea, and stood at the kitchen window watching the grey summer dawn come up over the crooked rooftops of Grimmauld Place. He could hear Sirius turning pages behind him, quickly at first, then more slowly, then very slowly indeed. When Sirius reached Appendix G, he stopped turning pages altogether. Harry turned around. Sirius was sitting with the audit open in front of him and both hands flat on the table on either side of it, as if he needed to anchor himself. He wasn't reading anymore. He was just sitting there, looking at the page, and his expression was one Harry had never seen on him before, not anger, not grief, something older and more deliberate than either. "He knew about your mother," Sirius said. It wasn't a question. 1977, Harry said. 3 years before I was born. He knew what she was. What she carried. What you'd inherit. Yes. Sirius looked up at him. "He knew all of this before you were born, Harry." He knew before Voldemort. Before the prophecy. He stopped. Pressed his mouth together. Started again. He'd already decided what you were going to be. Yes, Harry said again. That's what I think. Sirius stood up. He pushed back his chair and stood up and walked to the far end of the kitchen and stood there with his back to Harry and both hands on the stone counter, and Harry could see the muscles in his jaw working, could see the rigid control he was exercising, and he understood it because he'd felt the same thing sitting at the kitchen table in Privet Drive. That particular species of rage that was so large it had to be kept very carefully contained or it would do damage. I'm not going to confront him yet, Harry said. Good, Sirius said, without turning around. Because if you gave me 20 minutes alone with him right now, I'd end his career and possibly his face, and only one of those things would be helpful. I need to understand the full scope first. All 7 houses. The legal framework. What we can actually do with this. Harry paused. There's a goblin, Griphook, the one who sent me the audit, he wants to meet. Tuesday. He hasn't reported the findings to anyone. He's waiting for me to decide how to proceed. Sirius turned around. His expression had settled into something harder and more contained, the old Auror's intelligence working beneath the surface. Griphook, he said. I know that name. He's been at the bank 30 years. Reputation for being entirely unmovable on questions of honor. If he's brought this to you instead of burying it, he means it. That's what I thought. Harry pulled the audit back toward him. There's also the question of Hermione and Ron. I've asked them to come. Hermione's going to have a hard time with this. Hermione has hero worship issues where Dumbledore's concerned, Sirius said, in the tone of someone stating a fact. But she's got good bones, Harry. When she looks at the evidence, she'll follow it. She always follows the evidence, even when it takes her somewhere she doesn't want to go. I know, Harry said. That's why I trust her with it. He looked at his godfather across the length of the kitchen. Are you with me on this? Not just, are you angry? I know you're angry, I'm asking whether you can think through it with me. I need people who can think. Sirius held his gaze for a moment, and something passed through his expression that was the quieter and more serious version of the man he'd been before Azkaban, the one who had apparently been very good at his job, once, before Dumbledore's careful management of the narrative had made him a fugitive and then a recluse. I'm with you, he said. Whatever comes next. I'm with you. Harry nodded. He picked up the audit report, turned to the fresh parchment at the back that the goblins always included for notes, and began writing down everything he knew and everything he still needed to find out. Outside, the dawn had fully arrived, pale and particular over the London rooftops, and somewhere in Scotland the greatest wizard of the age was presumably rising for breakfast, unaware that his 17-year-old chess piece had just found the board. Chapter 2, The Weight of 7 Seals. Hermione arrived first, which was predictable, at 10:30 on Sunday morning with a bag that was clearly charmed to hold 4 times its visible capacity and an expression that meant she'd been worrying the entire journey. She stepped through the front door of Grimmauld Place, looked at Harry standing in the hallway, and immediately said, "What's happened?" It wasn't a question. "Come in," Harry said. "I'll explain when Ron gets here." "Harry, you told me to come without telling anyone and not to go through Professor Dumbledore, which means either something has gone wrong or, Hermione. Come in." She came in. She looked at Sirius, who was sitting at the kitchen table with a mug of tea and the particular stillness of someone who had been sitting with difficult information for several hours and had reached a kind of exhausted equilibrium with it. Sirius met her eyes and said nothing, which worried her more than anything Harry had said. Ron arrived 40 minutes later via a portkey Sirius had arranged, stumbling through the kitchen door with his hair sticking up and a piece of toast still in his hand, looking around at the assembled expressions with the rapid threat assessment of someone who had grown up in a household where, "We need to talk," frequently preceded something catching fire. "Right," he said, setting down the toast. "How bad is it?" "Sit down," Harry said. They both sat down. Harry put the audit report on the table. "This is my Gringotts inheritance audit," he said. "Standard procedure for turning 17, they run it on everyone with a noble house designation. A goblin named Griphook did mine and found something he thought I should know about before my birthday." He paused. He'd been thinking about how to say this since yesterday and had concluded there was no version of it that was going to land gently. "Dumbledore has been controlling my estate since I was 14 months old. He placed a redirect on my mail, locked my Wisengamot voting proxy to himself, and used a power of attorney document he had no legal right to file to suppress 6 separate noble house inheritances that should have transferred to me." Silence. Hermione's face had gone very still in the way it did when she was processing something that conflicted with a deeply held belief, not blank, but arrested, like a machine receiving input it wasn't designed to handle. Ron was looking at the audit report. 6. 6, Harry said. On top of the Potter Lordship. 7 total. 7 houses. Ron's voice was careful and precise in the way it got sometimes, when he set aside his usual register and thought. Harry, that's more than almost anyone alive. The Malfoys have 2. The Longbottoms have 2. 7 houses in one person hasn't happened since Merlin, Harry said. Literally. And that's because one of the houses is Emery's. Which is Merlin's line. Through my mum. Ron put both hands flat on the table. Through your mum, he repeated. Through my mum. Ron looked at Hermione. Hermione was looking at the report with her jaw set and her eyes very bright, and Harry recognized that brightness. It was the one she got when she was working very hard not to cry and was furious at herself for wanting to. There's more, Harry said. There's a section about my mother's bloodline. She was a Gaunt, Hermione. Not by name, her grandmother was a squib who fled the family and married a Muggle. But the blood was there, and Dumbledore had it analyzed in 1977. He knew exactly what my mum was. What I'd inherit. He opened the report to the tab for Appendix G and slid it across to her. He wrote this. That sentence there. Read it. Hermione looked down at the page. She read the sentence. Harry watched her read it, watched her eyes move across Dumbledore's handwriting, watched something go out of her face that he suspected wasn't coming back. The boy cannot know what he is until we are certain he is what we need him to be. That's his handwriting, she said, very quietly. The goblins verified it. 3 independent analysts. Hermione closed her eyes. Nobody spoke for a moment. The kitchen was very quiet, the particular Sunday morning quiet of an old house that had absorbed too many years of difficult conversations. Okay, Ron said finally, and Harry could have kissed him for it. Ron reached forward and picked up the front section of the audit with the practical calm of someone who had already decided the facts were the facts and standing on ceremony wasn't going to help anyone. Walk me through it. All of it. Start from Potter and go through to Emery's. Harry walked them through it. He laid it out methodically, section by section, the same way he'd been assembling it in his own head since Thursday, not as a story of betrayal, but as a sequence of facts, each one documented, each one verified, each one pointing in the same direction. Hermione kept her eyes on the report while he spoke, tracking the evidence, and he could see the war being fought behind her expression, the rigorous Hermione who followed evidence wherever it went, fighting against the version of herself that had built an entire moral scaffolding on the idea of Albus Dumbledore as a good man. When he got to the Black Estate section, Sirius reached forward and tapped the page. That's the one that made me understand what we're actually dealing with, he said to Hermione. Not the Potter stuff, that could theoretically be explained as overcautious guardianship, some kind of twisted version of protecting Harry. But this, he tapped it again. I was in Azkaban. I wrote that will with no expectation that I'd ever be free, and I did it so Harry would be protected. He would have had everything, a proper home, everything. And it was held in a filing queue because Dumbledore didn't want anyone to take Harry out of the arrangement he'd designed for him. Hermione said nothing. "I'm not angry at Dumbledore for believing what he believed," Sirius continued, with the deliberate control Harry had seen him exercise that morning. He believed the end justified the means. He believed Harry needed to be molded and contained and kept ignorant until the right moment. Maybe he even believed it was kindness. But it was still theft, Hermione. 7 times over. Hermione looked up. "I know," she said. Her voice was precise and a little raw. "I know that. I'm not defending it. I'm just trying to," she stopped. Pressed her fingertips together. "I'm trying to work out how much of what I believed about him was real and how much was a story he told." "Some of both, probably," Harry said. "He's not a villain. He's someone who decided the rules didn't apply to him because he was certain enough he was right. And that's its own kind of danger." Hermione looked at him for a moment, and something shifted in her expression, less the arrested quality from before, more the Hermione he knew, who was capable of extraordinary things when she stopped grieving long enough to get angry. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I'm meeting with Griphook on Tuesday," Harry said. "I need to understand the full legal framework, what the goblins can do, what I can do, what rights I have and when I can exercise them. I also need to know how much of this I can act on before my birthday and how much requires me to be 17. He looked around the table. "I don't want to go to Dumbledore with this until I'm ready. Not until I understand the full board." "He'll find out you've been to Gringotts," Hermione said immediately. "He has contacts in, we're meeting through the confidential audit consultation channel," Harry said. "Griphook's already flagged that it won't appear in the standard record." Hermione was quiet for a moment, running calculations. "The redirect on your mail," she said. "It's still active?" "According to the audit, yes. So any mail going to you through standard wizarding channels is being intercepted. That includes, Harry, that includes your Hogwarts letters, your legal correspondence, everything. Has been since 1980. Ron let out a long breath. "So every time Dumbledore seemed to know what you were thinking, every time he was always one step ahead, he was reading my mail," Harry said flatly. "Among other things." He picked up his tea, which had gone cold. "Look, there are things I need from both of you. Hermione, I need you to research the legal framework for noble house inheritance. Everything about what rights a lord designate has at 17, Wisengamot voting procedures, and anything about the precedents for challenging a fraudulent power of attorney filing. I know you'll be thorough. I need you to be fast." Hermione was already reaching for her bag. She had, Harry noticed with a wave of genuine affection, packed research materials. She'd known this was going to require research even before she knew what it was about. "Ron," Harry said, "I need you to think about the people we know and trust and whether any of them have information that might be relevant. Your mum and dad," he paused carefully. "Your mum is close to Dumbledore. I'm not saying she'd lie to us, but I'm saying she might inadvertently flag something if she knew what we were looking at." Ron's expression flickered, the briefest shadow, and then resolved into the pragmatic clarity that Harry had always valued more than Ron knew. "Mum wouldn't do it on purpose. But yeah. Understood." He paused. "Dad, though. Dad might be different. He's always been, he asks questions at the ministry that make people uncomfortable. He doesn't just accept the official version of things." "That's useful," Harry said. "But not yet. Not until I know more." "There's someone else," Sirius said. He'd been quiet while Harry laid out the task assignments, but now he set down his mug with a small decisive sound. "Augusta Longbottom." Harry looked at him. He'd seen the name in the appendices, connected to one of the suppressed houses through a tangle of genealogical cross-references that he hadn't fully unpacked yet. "She's in the audit. I didn't fully work out why. The Longbottom family has documentation, Sirius said. Augusta specifically. She came to me, years ago, before Azkaban, actually, in the late 70s, with questions about the noble house records that made me think she'd found something. I didn't have time to pursue it. Then everything happened. He spread his hands. But if she's been sitting on evidence for 25 years and waiting for someone with the standing to act, then you're claiming the relevant lordships would give her a legal partner in whatever she's been building. Harry turned this over. Augusta Longbottom was a formidable woman, he knew that from the few interactions Neville had described. Rigid and demanding and occasionally unkind to her grandson in her expectations, but with a steel in her spine that he respected. If she'd been holding documentation for 25 years without breaking, she was trustworthy. I'll add that to the list for after Tuesday, Harry said. Let me see what Griphook says first. What about Dumbledore in the meantime? Ron asked. He's going to expect contact, isn't he? The Order is watching your house. When they figure out you've left, probably already have, Harry said. Tonks will have noticed I wasn't at breakfast. They'll assume I came here. He shrugged. This is the first place anyone would look, and Sirius being my godfather is a known thing. My coming here isn't suspicious on its own. But not telling anyone is, Hermione said. She'd pulled out a book and a notepad and was already writing. She did this when she was processing something difficult, redirected the emotion into action. He'll ask why you didn't come through Order channels. I'll tell him I wanted to see Sirius and I was impatient, Harry said. Which is true. He looked at his godfather. Sorry. Completely fine, Sirius said dryly. I enjoy being used as a cover story. The important thing, Harry continued, is that we don't change our behavior toward him until we're ready. No big moves, no confrontations, nothing that would tell him we know. We act normal. Hermione stopped writing and looked up. Can you do that? Act normal around him? Harry thought about the sentence in Appendix G. He thought about being 16 months old and having his life arranged around him. He thought about every time Dumbledore had looked at him with those kind, measuring eyes and said exactly the right thing to keep him exactly where he needed to be. Yes, Harry said. I can do that. There was something in his voice that made both Hermione and Ron look at him for just a moment longer than usual, not with concern, exactly, but with the quiet recognition that he was different than he'd been before Thursday. Not darker. Not colder. Just, resolved, in a way that hadn't been there before. Like a door had closed inside him and locked, and behind it was a room he was done letting other people into. Dumbledore's owl arrived that evening. It was a magnificent bird, as all his owls were, and it waited with regal patience on the window ledge while Harry read the letter with Sirius reading over his shoulder. Dear Harry, I understand you have arrived safely at Grimmauld Place, which is a relief, though I confess the manner of your departure from Privet Drive gave me some concern. Traveling alone and outside the arranged Order escort is rather dangerous, as I'm sure you're aware, given the current climate. I would very much like to speak with you at your earliest convenience. Perhaps Tuesday? I could come to Grimmauld Place, or you could come to Hogwarts, whichever is most comfortable for you. I have some matters I would like to discuss regarding your upcoming birthday and certain arrangements for the coming year that I think you'll find both interesting and necessary. Yours, with great affection, Albus Dumbledore. Harry read the letter. He turned it over, checked the back, turned it front again. He took out a quill. Professor Dumbledore, sorry for the scare, I was impatient to see Sirius and I knew the route was safe enough. I'll be more careful. Tuesday won't work for me, I'm afraid. I have a vault consultation at Gringotts in the morning. Would Wednesday evening suit? I'm happy to come to Hogwarts. Harry he gave it to the owl. The owl departed. Sirius read the response over his shoulder as Harry wrote it, and when the owl had gone he said, quietly, vault consultation. He'll want to know what that is. Good, Harry said. Let him wonder. Sirius smiled, the particular smile that appeared on his face in moments of pure appreciation for audacity. "You've changed, you know," he said. "Since you walked in yesterday." "I know," Harry said. "Is that a problem?" "Absolutely not." Sirius clapped him on the shoulder once. "Your father would have liked this version of you. Honestly, I think he would have preferred it." Harry thought about that for a while. Monday passed in a storm of preparation. Hermione had found, within 6 hours of establishing herself at the kitchen table with 3 books and a notepad, enough on noble house inheritance law to fill a small pamphlet, which she then summarized into a tight 2-page document that she handed to Harry over breakfast with the manner of someone turning in particularly excellent homework. "The key points," she said, pointing with her quill, "are these. Lord Designate status confers full legal rights at 17 regardless of whether the lordship has been formally claimed. That means the suppression Dumbledore implemented has been technically invalid since the moment you turn 17, well, since the moment you will turn 17, and any actions taken under the power of attorney after that date are contestable. The tricky part is the period before you were 17, where the law is murkier." "How murky?" Harry asked. "Murky enough that Dumbledore's solicitors could probably argue it either way. Which means the more important angle is the fraudulent filing itself, not what happened under it, but how the power of attorney was obtained. The law is very clear that a power of attorney over a noble house estate requires the consent of the oldest living relative in the direct line or, failing that, a Wisengamot-approved substitute guardian." She tapped the page. "James Potter's sister. Did you know he had a sister?" Harry looked up from the document. "What?" "Doria Potter née Black. She's in the Audit's genealogical table, Appendix A. She was alive in 1981. She died in 1985, apparently of natural causes, but the relevant point is that she was alive when the power of attorney was filed, and she was never contacted." Hermione's voice had taken on the clipped precision it got when she'd found something genuinely significant. Dumbledore didn't just bypass Sirius. He bypassed a living relative in the direct line. Ron, who was sitting across the table eating toast and reading the appendices with the focused attention he usually reserved for chess, looked up. "That's not procedural. That's criminal." "Yes," Hermione said. "It is." Harry looked at the summary page. He was thinking about his grandmother, a woman he'd never known existed, who had apparently been alive for the first 4 years of his life, who had presumably had no idea he was being raised in a cupboard under the stairs of a house in Surrey because no one had thought to tell her. "Does it say how she died?" he asked. Hermione hesitated. "Hermione. The audit notes it as natural causes," she said carefully. "But the goblin bloodline analysis flagged an anomaly in the succession records around the time of her death. It doesn't say anything explicit. It just flags it as requiring further investigation." The kitchen was very quiet. "Add it to the list," Harry said. He said it in a perfectly level voice, and Ron and Hermione both looked at him for a moment, and then Hermione wrote it down. Tuesday morning, Harry left Grimmauld Place at 8:30, alone, wearing Muggle clothes and a jacket with the collar up despite the July heat. He took the tube to Charing Cross Road, walked past the leaky cauldron without going in. Tom the barman knew Dumbledore well enough that Harry didn't need that particular flag raised, and came around to the east side of Gringotts through a narrow side street that smelled of old stone and money, the way the whole alley did but more concentrated. The staff entrance was where Griphook's letter had described it, a plain wooden door, brass handle, copper owl mounted above the lintel. Harry gave his name to the clerk at the lower desk, a young goblin who looked up at him with the neutral assessment of someone who was professionally prohibited from being impressed by anyone, and said he was there for a vault consultation. He was led through a warren of back corridors, deeper and colder than the public areas of the bank, lit by lamps that burned with a green-white goblin light that made everything look precisely, almost mathematically real. The air smelled of old parchment and metal and something mineral that might have been the mountain of stone pressing down from above. Griphook's office was small and very full. Every surface was covered in stacked parchment, organized in a way that appeared chaotic and was probably rigorously systematic. Griphook himself was standing at the far end of the desk when Harry came in, and he looked exactly as Harry remembered him, slight and sharp, with eyes that were simultaneously assessing and already decided. "Mr. Potter," Griphook said. "Griphook," Harry said. He sat in the chair across the desk without being invited, which seemed to be the right choice. Griphook's eyes moved fractionally in a way that suggested approval of directness. "You've read the full report." "Every word." 3 times. Harry set the audit on the desk between them. "I have questions about the legal mechanics, what I can file, when, and what each filing does. But first I want to understand one thing." "Ask." "You've been at this bank for 30 years, Harry said. You've processed 11,000 audits. You said so in your letter. You must have seen irregularities before, smaller ones, maybe, but irregularities. And the policy was to route everything through the liaison office, which routes to Dumbledore. So my question is, why now? Why me? What made this audit the one you brought directly instead of filing it through the usual channel?" Griphook was quiet for a moment. He picked up a quill from his desk, turned it between his fingers, set it down. "Appendix G," he said. Specifically the document dated 1977. The letter. The sentence in the letter. Griphook's dark eyes met Harry's without flinching. Goblins have a concept in our culture that does not translate easily into English. The closest word is ungrolak. It refers to a form of theft that is particularly dishonorable, not the theft of possessions, which is serious enough, but the theft of identity. Of what a person is, rather than what they have. He paused. What Dumbledore did to the estates and the voting proxies, that is theft of possessions. What that sentence describes, deciding what a person is allowed to know about themselves, deciding who they are allowed to become based on your requirements for them, that is ungrolak. There is no amount of protocol or professional obligation that would make me complicit in it. Harry held his gaze. "Thank you," he said, and meant it simply. Griphook gave a short nod. "Now. Your questions." For the next 2 hours, they worked through it with the systematic focus of 2 people who had both been waiting to do exactly this. Griphook walked Harry through the legal architecture of noble house inheritance with the brisk efficiency of someone who had been thinking about this for 2 weeks and had prepared accordingly. The key points resolved themselves as follows. Harry's 17th birthday, 11 days away, was the legal threshold for full Lord designate rights. On that date, any suppression applied to his houses became void unless actively maintained through renewed legal filings that would now require Harry's own consent, which he would not be giving. The power of attorney document was challengeable on 3 independent grounds: the failure to contact Doria Potter, the failure to present the filing to a sitting Wisengamot Guardian panel, and the use of a magical signature that the Goblin's analysis suggested had been applied under circumstances that were, to put it delicately, not fully consensual. That last point Griphook flagged with particular care. "The document bears the signatures of 2 witnesses," he said, spreading a copy of it on the desk before Harry. "We have traced both witnesses. One is deceased. The other is a retired ministry solicitor currently living in Edinburgh. We have not approached her. That will be your decision. Who filed the paperwork at the ministry? Was it Dumbledore directly? A ministry clerk in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement filed it, acting on instructions. The clerk's name is in the appendices." Griphook paused. The clerk was, at the time of filing, 23 years old and would not have had the authority to recognize the irregularities. He almost certainly did not know what he was doing. And now? Now he is the deputy head of the DMLE. Griphook's expression did not change. "Whether that is relevant is, again, your decision." Harry sat with that. The political layers of this were beginning to clarify themselves. the ripple effects of pulling one thread in a web of 30-year-old decisions. He thought about what it meant that the clerk who'd filed the fraudulent documents had been promoted, over and over, through a ministry that Dumbledore had enormous influence over. The Wisengamot seats, Harry said. If I claim all 7 houses, what does that actually mean, in terms of voting power? Griphook unfolded another sheet of parchment, a chart. Currently, the Wisengamot has 51 members holding noble house votes alongside the appointed members. 7 votes in that body is not a majority. However, he traced a line on the chart with one finger. 3 of your houses carry what are called founding votes. Ancient designations from the original Wisengamot charter that carry weighted value in specific categories of legislation. House Gryffindor, House Slytherin, and House Emrys each carry a founding vote, which in matters of magical law, inheritance, and constitutional change count as 3 votes each. He looked up. In the right procedural context, your 7 seats have the effective weight of 13. Harry looked at the chart. He thought about Dumbledore's voting proxy and the legislation that had passed through the Wisengamot over the past 16 years, the laws, the appointments, the rulings. 13 effective votes, controlled by one man, for 16 years. I want to understand one more thing, Harry said. He was looking at the chart but he wasn't really seeing it anymore. The money. The intercepted income from the estates. Where did it go? Griphook reached into the stack of parchment on his left and produced a statement. He set it on the desk in front of Harry. This is the full accounting of redirected income from all 7 estates over 16 years. He paused. You should be aware that this number is significant. Harry looked at the number at the bottom of the page. He looked at it for long enough that Griphook said, the figure is correct. It has been verified independently 4 times. That's not just, Harry stopped. He recalibrated. He thought about what you could do with a number like that. Not for himself, the abstract personal wealth of it meant relatively little to him, less than it probably should have. But what you could do with it. The influence it represented. The projects it had funded, for 16 years, by someone other than him. What's it been spent on? We have traced approximately 40% of it, Griphook said. Various expenditures, some legitimate-seeming order of the Phoenix operational costs, some political donations to ministry candidates, some that we have been unable to account for through standard channels. He folded his hands. The remaining 60% is more opaque. We are working on it. Keep working, Harry said. We intended to. Harry leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling of Griphook's office, the low stone arc of it, the lamp burning its precise green-white light, and thought about what came next. The scale of it was extraordinary, and the temptation to act immediately was strong, but acting immediately meant acting before he was ready, and acting before he was ready meant Dumbledore had time to respond. The moment Harry moved, the game changed. He needed to be entirely prepared before that moment came. My birthday is the 11th, Harry said. I want to come back here on the 12th. First thing in the morning. I want to claim all 7 lordships in the same session. Griphook's eyes moved fractionally. All 7. At once. Is there a reason not to? No legal reason, Griphook said slowly. There are practical ones. The claiming ritual for noble house lordships requires a blood acknowledgement for each house. 7 in sequence is demanding. No one has done 7 in a single session in approximately 9 centuries. Who did it 9 centuries ago? A pause. The records indicate it was Merlin himself, claiming founding rights to his own houses upon the establishment of the compact. Harry almost laughed. It was the most absurd thing, and yet it wasn't absurd at all. Okay, he said. Then it's been done. We'll do it again. I want the accounts frozen as of the claiming, no further withdrawals under the proxy authorization. And I want the Wisengamot notification filed the same day, so the seats are active before anyone has a chance to contest them. Griphook looked at him for a long moment. It was not the assessing look he'd arrived with, that one had been the look of a goblin deciding whether this particular wizard was worth the complication. This was something else. Something that might, in a goblin, have been called respect, though Griphook would have described it as professional satisfaction at finding the right tool for a job. "We will need 11 days to prepare the documentation," Griphook said. "There are blood acknowledgement instruments that haven't been used in decades. The Emery's one in particular will require preparation that I will not detail yet. Some things are better understood when you're standing in front of them." He paused. "There is also the matter of what you intend to do about Dumbledore specifically. The goblins can handle the estate recovery and the Wiesengemot filing. The criminal matter, the fraudulent power of attorney, the witness solicitation, the redirected funds, that requires the DMLE. The DMLE is compromised," Harry said. "Some of it," Griphook agreed. "Not all." "I know someone in the DMLE," Harry said, thinking. "Tonks. She's order, but she's a good person. She asks the right questions." He paused. "I'll need to think about that carefully." "As you should." Griphook stood, which seemed to indicate the formal portion of the meeting was concluded. "There is one further thing I wish to say, Mr. Potter. In a private capacity, outside the audit." Harry stood as well. "When this becomes public, and it will become public, there will be people who argue that Dumbledore acted in good faith. That his intentions were protective. That the ends he worked toward justified the methods he used." Griphook's voice was very level. "They will not be entirely wrong. He did protect you, in his way. He did believe he was serving a necessary purpose." "I know," Harry said. "I am not telling you this to soften your resolve," Griphook said. "I am telling you this so you are prepared for the argument. Because an enemy with a bad argument is easy to defeat. An enemy with a partially good argument, that one requires more care." Harry looked at the goblin across the organized chaos of his desk, this small, precise, 31-year professional who had broken protocol for the first time in his career because of one sentence in a document that described a wrong that made his chest go cold. "You're pretty good at this," Harry said. "I am the best auditor this bank has employed in 50 years, Griphook said, without a trace of false modesty. "You should keep that in mind if you require further assistance." "I will," Harry said. "Thank you, Griphook. For all of it." Griphook gave another short nod. Then, in a tone that was as close to warmth as his register allowed, he said, "The compact between goblin kind and wizarding nobility was supposed to be one of mutual respect and honest dealing. It has not always been honored on either side. If this is an opportunity to correct that, even in one instance, then the trouble of it seems worthwhile." Harry shook his hand. He was back at Grimmauld Place by 1:30, and the atmosphere in the kitchen had changed in his absence. Hermione had clearly been research spiraling, because there were 6 books open on the table and her notepad was covered in dense writing with arrows connecting sections. Ron had been thinking, which for Ron looked like very focused staring at nothing while absent-mindedly eating biscuits. Sirius had apparently been cleaning things aggressively, because the kitchen surfaces were all considerably cleaner than they'd been that morning and there was a slightly manic energy about him that suggested he'd been channeling feeling into action. All 3 of them looked up when Harry came in. He sat down. He put his hands flat on the table. He looked at them, the 3 people he trusted most in the world, the 3 people who had, each in their own way, walked into this with him without flinching. 11th is my birthday, he said. 12th is when it starts. He paused. All of it. Right, Ron said. Okay, said Hermione, and picked up her quill. Sirius didn't say anything. He just picked up the kettle, because tea was the closest thing the British magical tradition had to a battle cry, and put it on the hob. The kitchen filled with the small sound of water beginning to heat, and outside the tall grimy windows of Grimmauld Place the city went about its unknowing Sunday business, and the four of them bent their heads together over the documents and the books and the notepad full of arrows, and began to plan. Chapter 3. The Lady of the North. Augusta Longbottom's house was not what Harry expected. He'd built a picture of it in his head on the train north, something austere and grey, full of taxidermy and portraits of disapproving ancestors, the kind of house that matched the woman Neville had described in 100 small wincing anecdotes. Cold corridors. Rooms that felt like exams. What he found instead, when the hired wizarding car turned off a narrow Yorkshire lane and the house came into view between two old oaks, was something rambling and warm-looking, built from honey-coloured stone that had deepened over centuries to the colour of good whiskey. Roses climbed the south wall in cheerful defiance of good taste. There were several cats visible in the garden, all of them enormous. A greenhouse to one side was steamed up from within, and through the condensation Harry could make out the shapes of plants growing with the particular enthusiasm of things that had been well cared for. "Huh," said Ron, from the seat beside him. "She does have a garden," Hermione said, in the tone of someone updating a mental file. Sirius, in the front passenger seat, was watching the house with the focused attention of someone who had been here before. "She'll have known we were coming since the end of the lane," he said. "Augusta is, she is not someone who is ever surprised on her own property." He was right. The front door opened before they reached it, and Augusta Longbottom stood in the doorway wearing green robes that managed to look simultaneously like formal dress and working clothes, and a hat that should have been ridiculous but somehow wasn't. She was shorter than Harry had imagined, which surprised him. Neville had always made her sound enormous, but the quality that made her seem large was still present, a density of bearing, an absolute certainty about where she stood in any given room. She looked at Harry first. Just for a moment, directly and with full attention, the way skilled people do when they're confirming something they've long suspected. "Lord Potter designate," she said. "Just Harry is fine," Harry said. "It isn't, actually," she said. "But we'll manage. Come in." The inside of the house was warm and smelled of tea and old books and something herbal from the greenhouse. Augusta led them through a hallway lined with portraits, Longbottom ancestors who watched with varying degrees of interest but didn't speak, which Harry found restful, and into a sitting room where the furniture was old but not precious and the fireplace was lit despite the July warmth because, Harry suspected, it was always lit. She sat them down. She produced tea from apparently nowhere in the manner of someone who had been producing tea for guests for 50 years and had refined it to an art form. She sat across from Harry, folded her hands in her lap, and looked at him with the patient certainty of someone who had been waiting for this conversation for a very long time. "You've seen the Gringotts audit," she said. "Yes," Harry said. "And Griphook sent it to you directly?" "Yes." Augusta made a small sound of satisfaction. "Good goblin," she said. "I always thought he would be the one. He was the only auditor with the seniority and the spine." She reached to the side table, where a wooden box sat with the stillness of something that hadn't been moved in a while. She lifted the lid. Inside, neatly arranged in labeled folders, was a stack of documents. 31 years, she said. "I've been collecting this for 31 years. She placed the box on the low table between them. "The first thing in there," she said, "is a letter from Charles Potter, your grandfather, Harry. Written in October 1979, 14 months before you were born. He was worried. He'd been doing his own investigation into some irregularities in the Potter estate's Wisengamot filings, and he'd found that the voting proxy had been redirected without his knowledge or consent. He came to me because I was on the Noble House Registry Committee that year, and I had access to the filing records." She paused. "He died in December 1979 of what was reported as a cardiac episode. He was 57 years old and had, 3 weeks earlier, passed a full healer's examination." The sitting room was very quiet. "The second thing in there," Augusta continued, with the controlled calm of someone who had rehearsed this, "is the coroner's report from that examination, the original, not the version that went into the public record, which I obtained through a contact at St. Mungo's who is now retired. You'll want to read it in full, but I will tell you now that it flags an anomalous magical trace in the cardiac tissue that the attending healer noted and then, apparently, decided not to pursue. Sirius had leaned forward slightly. His hands were resting on his knees with the careful stillness of someone managing strong feeling through deliberate stillness. He was killed, Sirius said quietly. I believe so, Augusta said. I cannot prove it. Not to a legal standard. But I have believed it since 1979, and the reason I've been building this file for 31 years is so that when someone with the standing to act finally appeared, would have something to give them. She looked at Harry. You are the first person with the standing to act. Harry looked at the box. He thought about his grandfather, a man he'd never known, whose portrait he'd never seen, whose name he'd only encountered in the audit appendices as a line in a genealogical table. A man who had been asking questions in October 1979 and was dead by December. What about Doria Potter? Harry said. My grandmother. She was alive until 1985. Doria knew, Augusta said. She came to me in 1982. She'd been trying to get access to you, she didn't know where you were. Dumbledore's people had been, discouraging, let's say, when she attempted to make inquiries. She died in 1985. Augusta's voice remained level. Another cardiac episode. She was 61. Ron was very still in his chair. Hermione had stopped writing. Harry held the older woman's gaze. I think that people who look too closely at certain things and lack the protection of significant political standing have a pattern of dying of cardiac episodes, Augusta said. I think I have survived because I have enough standing that removing me would cause more questions than it would suppress. And I think that you, particularly now that you are about to be 17 and your inheritance is beyond anyone's ability to suppress, are the first person who is both unreachable and knowledgeable enough to be dangerous to the people who arranged those deaths. You're not just talking about Dumbledore, Harry said. No, she said. I'm not. Dumbledore arranged the theft. But the deaths, she paused for the first time, a small crack in the controlled delivery, quickly repaired. The deaths have a different quality to them. Dumbledore is many things I find objectionable, but I do not believe he murdered your grandparents. She looked him very straight in the eye. I believe he knew. I believe he chose not to know fully. And I believe there is someone who was acting alongside him and further than him, and that person is still out there. Harry sat with this for a long moment, feeling the shape of it change in his understanding, from a story about one man's overreach to something more complicated, layered, with shadows at the edges he couldn't yet see clearly. Who? He said. I have a candidate, Augusta said. I won't name them yet. Not because I distrust the people in this room, her eyes moved briefly over Sirius, Ron, and Hermione. But because naming a person in this context makes it real in ways that can cause people to act prematurely, and I have spent 31 years not acting prematurely. I would like to do this correctly. She paused. What I will say is that this person is currently in a position of significant institutional power. And they have been watching Dumbledore's management of you with the same careful attention that Dumbledore watches Voldemort. Sirius made a sound that was not quite a word. I know, Augusta said, dryly. It does rather reframe things. You've been alone with this for 31 years, Hermione said. She'd found her voice, and it was steady, a little rough at the edges but steady. Why didn't you go to the Wisengamot? Augusta looked at her. With what standing? I had suspicions and documents that could be explained away by a sufficiently confident and widely respected man. And in the early years, I had other concerns. The composure shifted, very briefly, into something more human. My son and daughter-in-law were attacked in 1981. I spent rather a long time more focused on keeping Neville safe and functional than on justice for people who were already dead. She straightened. I've had more clarity in recent years. Is Neville? Harry started. Neville knows enough, Augusta said crisply. He knows more than he lets on, actually. He's sharper than he seems, my grandson. Takes after his father more than people realize. She paused, and something moved in her face that was unmistakably pride, pressed down under the habitual severity. He'll be here this afternoon. I asked him to come. I assumed you'd want someone your own age who knows the full picture, and he's known fragments of this since he was 15. Harry nodded. He looked at the wooden box. Can I read all of it? He asked. That's why it's on the table, Augusta said. They spent the morning reading. Augusta brought more tea at 11 and sandwiches at 12:30 without being asked, and the sitting room settled into the focused quiet of serious work. Harry and Hermione read the documents in sequence. Ron organized them and cross-referenced them against the audit appendices with the focused spatial intelligence he normally applied to chess. Sirius read certain sections and then set them face down on the table and went and stood at the window for a while, which Harry let him do. The contents of Augusta's box were extraordinary. Not individually, most individual documents were ambiguous, capable of innocent explanation if viewed in isolation, but in aggregate, and in the particular light that Griphook's audit threw on them, they resolved into a coherent picture. Charles Potter had been investigating a proxy filing irregularity in October 1979 and was dead by December. Doria Potter had been trying to access Harry through legal channels from 1981 and was dead by 1985. A ministry solicitor named Henrietta Vance, not the retired one in Edinburgh who had witnessed the power of attorney, but a different woman, had filed a formal query about the Potter estate with the Wisengamot in 1983 and had been quietly transferred to a desk position in the Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes 6 weeks later, from which she retired in 1991 without ever filing another query. 3 separate Noble House registry clerks over 20 years had flagged the suppressed designations on Harry's account as requiring review and had been, respectively, promoted sideways, transferred, and told the flag was a system error. The system wasn't generating errors. The system was being managed. By noon, Harry had read enough to understand that what he was looking at was not just Dumbledore's theft. Dumbledore had stolen the estates and the lordships, that was documented, provable, actionable. But layered around and beneath it was a second operation, quieter and more ruthless, that had been systematically eliminating or neutralizing every person who got close enough to see the theft clearly. And that second operation didn't have Dumbledore's fingerprints on it. It had someone else's. He had protection, Harry said, out loud, to no one in particular. Sirius turned from the window. Dumbledore, Harry said. Someone was protecting him. Not because they loved him or believed in him, or maybe not only that, but because his management of me served their purposes too. Which means whoever this is, they wanted the same thing Dumbledore wanted. They wanted me contained and controlled and ignorant until the right moment. He paused. The difference is what they were planning to do with me once that moment came. Dumbledore wanted you to defeat Voldemort, Hermione said slowly, fitting it together. That was his plan. His endpoint. And the other person? Ron said. Might have had a different endpoint in mind, Harry said. Or the same one, with themselves in a better position than Dumbledore when it was done. The room was quiet. I think, Augusta said from the doorway, she'd come back in without any of them noticing, that you are understanding it correctly. Neville arrived at 2:30. He came in through the back door, which suggested he'd cut through the garden, and he was wearing grass-stained gardening clothes and an expression of composed apprehension that Harry recognized. It was the face Neville wore when he'd already decided to be brave about something and was implementing the decision. He stopped in the doorway of the sitting room, looked at Harry, and said, "Gran told me you'd found the audit." "Yes," Harry said. Neville came in and sat down in the nearest chair. He looked at the document spread across the table with the calm of someone who'd imagined this moment often enough that the reality of it was less shocking than expected. "How much do you know?" he asked. "Most of it, I think," Harry said. "There's a piece we haven't fully mapped yet," someone behind the scenes, protecting the arrangement. Your grandmother won't name them yet. I know who she means, Neville said. He paused. I'm not going to name them either. Not yet. Gran's right about the timing. He looked at Harry steadily. But I will tell you this, when everything went to pieces at the Department of Mysteries and you lot were there, I was supposed to be there too. That wasn't an accident. Someone arranged for that information to reach you specifically through a channel that would guarantee you'd go to the Ministry. He paused again. It wasn't Voldemort who arranged it. The implication landed in the room with the weight of something very solid. Harry thought back to the vision, the corridor, the door, his godfather in pain, the terrible urgency of it. He'd always assumed Voldemort had planted it. Voldemort had certainly used it. But who had built the stage? Okay, Harry said. He looked at Neville and found, not for the first time, that the person sitting across from him was considerably more than the sum of the impressions people had formed of him. You're in this, then? All the way? My parents are in St. Mungo's in the permanent spell damage ward, Neville said, very quietly. They've been there my whole life. The people who put them there are walking around free because Dumbledore made choices about what kind of justice was and wasn't politically convenient. He met Harry's eyes. I've been in this since I was old enough to understand what happened to them. I was just waiting for someone who could actually do something about it. Harry nodded slowly. He thought about what it meant, Neville, carrying this for 15 years with nowhere to put it, nobody with the standing to act alongside him. Something solidified in his chest, quietly, the same way it had when he'd first read the Audit. Not just for himself, not just for the Lordships and the stolen inheritance and the letter about the boy who needed to be what they needed him to be. For this too. For everyone who had been contained and suppressed and redirected by the same careful management. Right, Harry said. He looked around the room, Sirius, Hermione, Ron, Augusta, Neville, and made a decision. We're claiming the first 3 Lordships on my birthday. Griphook is preparing the instruments. We use those 3 to establish legal standing for everything that comes after. Then on the 12th we go for all 7. Augusta was nodding. The 3 to start with? Potter, Black, and Peverell, Harry said. Potter because it's my primary designation. Black because it legally establishes Sirius's full rights and by extension mine as his ward, which we need before we can challenge the power of attorney. And Peverell because, he paused. Because it comes with something I want to have legally confirmed before we go any further. The Hallows. I want them acknowledged as mine. The invisibility cloak is already yours, Hermione said. Yes, Harry said. But the stone and the wand are currently in other people's possession, and I want the legal framework established before anyone has a chance to argue about it. He paused. Specifically the wand. I want that on the record. Sirius looked at him with the particular sharpness of someone following a strategic thread. You're going after Grindelwald's wand, he said. The Elder Wand. The Elder Wand is a Peverell inheritance artifact, Harry said. It belongs to the lord of that house. Which will be me. He met Sirius's eyes. I know where it is. The room was quiet again. That's, Harry, that's in Dumbledore's possession, Hermione said. She was not, Harry noticed, telling him not to pursue it. She was establishing facts. He won it from Grindelwald in 1945. He won it, Harry agreed. That's not the same as owning it. Under noble house inheritance law, he glanced at Hermione. Founding artifacts designated as house property revert to the rightful lord upon claiming, regardless of current possession, Hermione said, from memory, flatly. I read that last night. So the moment I claim House Peverell, Harry said, the Elder Wand is legally mine. What Dumbledore does with that information is up to him. Augusta made a small sound that was not quite a laugh but was in the same neighborhood. She looked at Harry with something that was unmistakably the expression she gave Neville on the rare occasions he did something that genuinely surprised her. "You're going to take his wand," she said. "I'm going to reclaim what's mine," Harry said. "Yes," she said. "That's exactly what I said." The afternoon shifted into planning. Augusta produced more documents, a detailed schematic of the Wisengamot's current composition that she'd been maintaining for years, with annotations in a spidery hand that marked alliances, allegiances, and swing votes. Ron leaned over it with immediate intensity, tracking the political geography with the same pattern recognition he used on a chessboard. 3 founding votes plus 4 regular seats gives you 13 effective votes, he said, tracing lines with his finger. But you need to flip the swing votes, and these 4 here, Parkinson, Greengrass, Bones, and Marchbanks, they're not committed either way. If you could get them before the formal Wisengamot session, Bones is a serious consideration, Sirius said. Amelia Bones. She's head of the DMLE and she's as honest as anyone in that building, which isn't saying much, but it is saying something. She's also a noble householder in her own right. She'd want evidence, Hermione said. Substantial evidence, presented formally. Good, Harry said. We have substantial evidence. Marchbanks was at school with Dumbledore, Augusta said, from her chair by the fire. She's respected him for 70 years. She will be harder. But she's fair, Neville said. She examined me for OWLS. She's genuinely fair. If the evidence is what it is, she won't ignore it. Harry thought about the political sequence, the chess moves, laid out in his mind. Claim the first 3 houses on his birthday. Use the legal standing those lordships gave him to challenge the power of attorney. Brief Amelia Bones before the Wisengamot session. Present the evidence in the session publicly, with the Gringotts documentation and Augusta's 31 years of accumulated files. 14 votes, maybe more. Freeze the accounts. Reclaim the wand. It was clean. If everything held. In Harry's experience, everything did not always hold, which was why the planning stage existed. There's a gap in this, Ron said, still looking at the schematic. The moment you make any formal filing, the claim, the power of attorney challenge, anything, Dumbledore's people at the ministry will flag it and it goes to him within hours. You'll have maybe a day before he moves to respond. That's enough, Harry said. Is it? If we've already briefed Bones and Marchbanks. If the accounts are frozen simultaneously with the filing. If the Wisengamot notification goes in at exactly the same moment. Harry paused. It needs to all happen at once. Not in sequence. All of it, simultaneously, so there's no gap to exploit. Hermione was writing fast, building the timeline. That's complex. It requires coordination across Gringotts, the Ministry Filing Office, the Wisengamot Registry, and 2 private briefings, all within a window of what, hours? Griphook will handle the Gringotts and Wisengamot side, Harry said. He's been preparing for this for 2 weeks. He's ready. He looked at Hermione. You and I briefed Bones and Marchbanks the day before. Day 11, that's the 10th, the day before my birthday. We go to them privately, show them the evidence, ask them to be present at the Gringotts claiming on the 12th. Not to commit to anything, just to be present, see it happen, see the documents. Bones will come, Sirius said. If you approach her properly, formally, with the noble house designation framing rather than personal accusation. She responds to procedure. Marchbanks? Neville looked at his grandmother. Augusta was quiet for a moment. Then she said, let me speak to Griselda. We were at school together, long before Albus arrived in the picture. I believe I can have that conversation without it feeling like an ambush. She paused. She'll be hurt by the evidence. She'll need room to be hurt before she can think straight. But she'll come. Harry looked around the room again. The plan was taking shape, not the rough outline he'd left Gringotts with on Tuesday, but something more detailed, with real people in it, each doing the thing they were actually best at. Augusta's institutional knowledge. Sirius's understanding of the political landscape. Hermione's legal research and capacity for formal presentation. Ron's tactical overview. Neville's quiet, specific knowledge of things none of them had known to ask about. He thought about something Griphook had said. An enemy with a partially good argument requires more care. One more thing, Harry said. He'd been saving this for the right moment and this felt like it. When we go to Dumbledore, and we will, eventually, we go with the evidence and we go formally and we go in a context where he can't simply reassure us into backing down. That means witnesses. That means a public setting. He paused. I don't want to humiliate him. That's not the point. What is the point? Ron asked. Accountability, Harry said. Not punishment. The point is that he stands in front of everyone who trusted him and he explains what he did and why. And then the people who trusted him can decide what to do with that. I don't get to decide that for them. He looked at Hermione. Even you get to decide for yourself. Hermione held his gaze. Her eyes were bright, still, they had been bright all day in the way that meant she was holding herself together through precision and focus. I already have, she said quietly. Good, Harry said. Late afternoon. Augusta had sent Neville to the greenhouse on some errand that Harry suspected was partly genuine and partly tactical, giving the younger members of the group time to talk without the presence of the older generation. The three of them sat on the low stone wall at the edge of the garden, with the July evening coming in warm from the west and the cats doing whatever it was Augusta's cats did, which seemed to involve slow patrol circuits and occasional philosophical pauses. Do you think about Dumbledore? Hermione asked. She was pulling at a piece of grass, not looking at either of them. Like, who he actually is. Whether we actually know him. I know who he's been to me, Harry said. I'm still working out whether that's the same thing. It's not, is it? Ron said. He was looking at the garden with his arms resting on his knees. What he's been to you is a version he made up. The kindly mentor, the twinkly eyes thing, the lemon drops. That's a character he played. It wasn't only a character, Hermione said. She paused. That's what makes it so, she stopped. Hard, Harry said. Yes. She finally looked up. He does care about you. I actually believe that. He cared about what you were going to do, and in his mind that was the same thing as caring about you. She pressed her lips together. He made a decision about what love was allowed to look like. And the decision he made was convenient for him. Harry thought about that for a while. The evening sun was cutting long shadows from the oaks at the bottom of the garden, and somewhere in the greenhouse Neville was moving around in the warm steamed air, and somewhere in Scotland a great man who had arranged Harry's birth circumstances the way a gardener arranges a plot was presumably going about his evening, unaware that 11 days from now the plot was rearranging itself. For what it's worth, Ron said, I think you're doing the right thing. The way you're doing it. Not running at him, not hiding from it, just building the case and letting it land properly. He paused. Your dad would have run at him. Just straight at him, wand out. Harry laughed, startled out of himself. Probably. Your mum would have done what you're doing, Ron said. All the way through. Methodical and then absolute. He shrugged, a little self-consciously. That's just what I think. Harry looked at him. He thought about Lily Evans, who had been a Gaunt and not known it, who had carried Merlin's blood and Slytherin's blood and Ravenclaw's blood and Gryffindor's blood and had apparently just been a very smart, very capable woman from Cokeworth who loved her son enough to die for him, all that legacy and inheritance irrelevant to the particular human fact of it. Thanks, Ron, he said. Neville came out of the greenhouse then, carrying a small plant wrapped in brown paper with the care of someone transporting something valuable, and when he reached them he held it out to Harry. "Gran wants you to have it," he said. "It's a rare species, goblin-cultivated moly. Protects against deception magic. You plant it near where you sleep." Harry took it carefully. It was a small, unassuming thing, a few silver leaves above dark soil. He looked at it for a moment. "Tell her thank you," he said. "She's at the window," Neville said, without looking. "She can hear you." Harry looked up at the house. Augusta was visible in the sitting-room window, upright and hawk-faced in the evening light, watching. He held up the plant. She gave him one short, decisive nod. The car back to London left at 7. They sat in the comfortable quiet of people who have spent a day doing serious work and are tired in a clean way, and the Yorkshire countryside rolled past in the long summer evening light. Harry was thinking about the claiming ritual. About standing in Gringotts in 11 days' time and pressing his hand against the blood acknowledgement instrument for House Peveril, and in that moment the Elder Wand, wherever it was, in whatever drawer or case in whatever tower of Hogwarts, becoming, legally and irrevocably, his. He wondered if Dumbledore would feel it. Whether the wand itself would know. He thought probably it would. The Elder Wand, according to everything he'd read and half understood from the stories his aunt had never told him, was not a passive object. It had opinions. It chose. And it had been waiting, for a very long time, in the hand of a man who had taken it rather than inherited it, and the difference between those two things was the whole moral weight of the situation in a single material fact. "Hermione," he said, into the quiet of the car. Teach me everything you know about the Deathly Hallows. From the beginning. All of it." She looked at him sideways. Then she opened her bag, produced a notebook, and said, "Right." So the original legend dates to approximately the 14th century, but the Goblin records place the actual artifacts significantly earlier. Ron closed his eyes and leaned his head back, smiling faintly. Sirius, in the front, was quiet and thoughtful, watching the evening countryside with the expression of a man who had spent 12 years being someone else's story and was working out, slowly and carefully, what it felt like to be his own. Outside, Britain was green and gold and unknowing, rolling past toward the night. 11 days. Chapter 4, Blood and Marble. The 31st of July arrived the way significant days always did, quietly, without ceremony, the world entirely unaware that anything had changed. Harry woke at 6 in the morning in his room at Grimmauld Place, which was lighter and less oppressive than it had been when he'd first stayed here. Sirius had spent considerable energy over the past year removing the worst of the house's darker decorations, and the room now had the comfortable anonymity of a space that had been made habitable by someone who cared but didn't have strong opinions about curtains. Pale morning light came through the gap between them. Hedwig was asleep in her cage. Somewhere below, he could hear Sirius already moving around in the kitchen. He lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, taking stock. 17. He was 17. The magical shift that was supposed to accompany reaching majority was subtle. Most wizards described it as a warmth, a kind of settling, the way a key feels different in your hand once a lock has opened. Harry had been half expecting something dramatic. What he felt instead was something quieter and more fundamental, the sensation, spreading from somewhere in his chest outward, of suppression lifting. Like a hand that had been pressing down on something for 16 years had simply released. He sat up. He pressed his palm flat against the wall beside his bed, the old stone of Grimmauld Place, and felt the magic in the building respond to him differently than it had yesterday. Not obsequiously, not with the fawning quality of charmed objects reacting to a famous name. Just recognition. Clean and factual, like two pieces of the same thing finding each other after a long time. He got up, got dressed, and went downstairs. Sirius was at the stove making eggs with the focused attention of someone who had decided that birthdays required a proper breakfast regardless of what the day contained. He looked up when Harry came in and something moved through his expression, the complicated brightness again, but different this morning, fuller, because the thing he'd been hoping for had arrived and it was real. "Happy birthday," he said. "Thanks," Harry said, sitting down. "How do you feel?" "I'm not the one who turned 17. "No, but you've been up since 5. Sirius turned back to the eggs. "I feel," he paused, "like something that should have happened a long time ago is finally happening." Harry watched his godfather's back for a moment. "The Black Lordship claims at Gringotts today will formally confirm your guardianship rights over me," he said. "The filing Dumbledore suppressed becomes active. Legally, as of this morning, you are my guardian." Sirius didn't move for a second. Then he said, very carefully, "I know. "I know you know," Harry said. "I just wanted to say it out loud." "So it was real." Sirius set down the spatula and turned around. He looked at Harry with the directness that was one of his better qualities, the inability to be dishonest about important things. 12 years, he said. 12 years in Azkaban and then 3 years running and then 2 years in this house, and the entire time I kept, there was a version of things where none of that happened. Where I got to you the night it happened and I just took you, and we were gone. We could have," he stopped. Pressed his mouth together. Started again. "The point is, today that version of things becomes the legal truth. Whatever the hell happened, as of today the record says I'm your guardian and you're my ward. And whoever arranged for the other version is going to have a very bad morning." The ghost of his old grin appeared. "Which I intend to thoroughly enjoy." Harry stood up, crossed the kitchen, and hugged his godfather. Sirius, who was not a man who accepted sentiment passively, hugged him back immediately and with considerable force, and they stood there in the kitchen for a moment with the eggs going slightly too far and neither of them caring. "All right," Sirius said, letting go. He turned back to the stove. "Eggs, then Gringotts, then we burn Dumbledore's careful plans to the ground. In that order." "That's the plan," Harry agreed. Ron and Hermione arrived at 8. Hermione had a folder under her arm and the expression of someone who had not slept as much as was ideal but was operating on precision and purpose. Ron had a look of contained excitement that Harry associated with moments before particularly important chess matches. They ate quickly and without much conversation, the companionable quiet of people who had been over the plan enough times that talking about it again would only add noise. Augusta's car arrived at 8:30. She came in, assessed the table, nodded once at Harry, and said, "Ready?" "Yes," Harry said. She looked at Neville, who had come with her and was wearing his better robes and a look of calm resolution that would have been unrecognizable to anyone who'd only known him from first-year herbology. "Stop pulling at your collar," she said to him, not unkindly. He stopped. They went to Gringotts the Muggle way, 2 cars through London traffic, which was sufficiently tedious to be almost grounding. Harry sat in the back between Sirius and Neville and watched the city go past and thought about nothing in particular, which was a skill he developed in defense against the dark arts and found useful before important moments. The alley was busy at 9 in the morning, the usual crowd of back-to-school shoppers and morning errand runners, and Harry walked through it in Muggle clothes with his collar up in the same way he'd done 2 weeks ago, not hiding, exactly, but not announcing himself either. Not yet. They went to the staff entrance. Griphook was waiting. He stood in the corridor outside his office in formal auditor's robes that Harry had not seen him wear before, a deep charcoal grey with the Gringotts seal embroidered at the collar in silver, the goblin equivalent of a pressed suit for a significant occasion. He looked at the group that Harry had brought and his assessment moved across them with rapid precision: Sirius, Hermione, Ron, Augusta, Neville, and he said nothing, which was itself a form of approval. "Everything is prepared," he said. "The instruments are in the claiming chamber. We have approximately 4 hours before the standard banking day creates traffic through the lower levels, which should be sufficient." "What happens in the claiming chamber?" Ron asked. "Each house requires a blood acknowledgement," Griphook said, walking. They followed him through the warren of back corridors, deeper than Harry had been before, the temperature dropping slightly with each turn. "You press your palm to the instrument. The instrument reads the blood and confirms the inheritance. If the line is genuine, which it is, the instrument accepts it and the record updates immediately. The suppression spells tied to the Dumbledore filing will dissolve at the moment of claiming. Will he feel it? Harry asked. Griphook paused almost imperceptibly. There is some debate about whether proxy suppressions have a tactile component for the person who placed them. My professional opinion is that an exceptionally sensitive wizard might notice a change. Most would not, until they attempted to exercise the proxy rights and found them gone. So we might have a window. We might. The claiming chamber was the most beautiful room Harry had ever been in without anyone having tried to make it beautiful. It was cut from a single continuous vein of dark stone, lit by the same green-white lamps but more of them, and in the center of the floor was a circle inlaid in pale metal, not gold, something older, with 7 positions marked within it. On a plinth at the edge of the circle stood the claiming instruments, 7 shallow bowls of the same pale metal, each one inscribed, each one with a small needle mechanism at its edge. Harry stood at the threshold and looked at it. 7 instruments, he said. Harry walked into the circle. He stood in the center of it, looked around at the 7 positions, and felt the magic of the chamber respond to his presence the same way the walls of Grimmauld Place had this morning, recognition, clean and factual. Like the room had been expecting him. He looked back at the group assembled at the edge of the chamber, Sirius, Hermione, Ron, Augusta, Neville, Griphook, and found them watching with the collected quality of people witnessing something they understood to be significant. Right, Harry said. Let's do House Potter first. House Potter was simple. He pressed his palm to the needle. The sting was brief. The blood met the metal and the instrument, the bowl, the inscription, lit with a warm amber light that was nothing like the green-white of the lamps, something older and more domestic, the color of heathfire. The light spread from the bowl across the pale metal circle to the first of the 7 positions and held there. The feeling that accompanied it was extraordinary. Harry had expected something ceremonial, perhaps slightly abstract. What he felt instead was physical and immediate, the sensation of walking through a door into a room that had always been yours, that had been locked for 16 years, and feeling the lock turn and the door open and all the air of it rushing to meet you. House Potter. Lord Harry James Potter. Recognized. The words didn't come audibly. They came in the way that certain important things did, not spoken but simply known, the way you know your own name. He turned to House Black. House Black was different. The instrument for the Black designation was older than the Potter one, visibly older, the inscriptions worn smooth at the edges, the pale metal darkened slightly with age. When Harry pressed his palm to it, there was a longer pause than the first, a moment of assessment, as if the instrument was reaching further back through the bloodline and reading a longer history. Then the amber light came, and it came in 2 parts. The usual warm spread across the circle to the 2nd position, and then a secondary pulse that moved outward beyond the circle entirely, touching the walls of the chamber and dissolving into them, which Griphook watched with careful attention. The secondary pulse confirms the dissolution of the suppression, he said, quietly. The redirect on the Black guardianship filing has been removed. The will is now active. Sirius made a sound that was not quite speech. Harry looked at him across the chamber. Sirius was standing with both hands at his sides and his jaw set and his eyes very bright, and he nodded once, the short, decisive nod that with Sirius was the equivalent of a longer emotional expression, compressed into something manageable. House Black. Lord Harry James Potter. Secondary designation confirmed. Guardianship assignment active. Harry turned to House Peverell. This was the one he'd been thinking about since Tuesday. The Peverell instrument was the oldest of all 7, genuinely ancient, the inscriptions not worn but carved, deep and deliberate, in a script that predated modern runes. The metal was different too, darker, with a grain to it that suggested it had been forged rather than cast. Harry looked at it for a moment before he pressed his palm to the needle. The sting was deeper this time. The light that came was not amber. It was silver-white, bright and clean and cold, and it didn't spread across the circle in the measured way the others had. It expanded, outward from the bowl and upward and in all directions simultaneously, filling the chamber with a radiance that made the green-white lamps look dim. For a moment it was bright enough that Harry could feel it as warmth against his skin. And then, from somewhere above, not in the chamber, but above it, connected to it through the deep stone of the bank and the magic that permeated all of it, something answered. Not loudly. Not dramatically. A vibration, low and certain, like a string being plucked somewhere at the root of things. Harry stood in the silver-white light and felt it pass through him, felt it read something in his blood that was older than Hogwarts, older than the bank, older than the compact between goblins and wizards. Something that was simply the acknowledgement of what he was. Then the light subsided, and the third position on the pale metal circle lit amber with the others, and the chamber returned to normal. The silence lasted for several seconds. "Well," Augusta said. "Yeah," Ron said. Griphook was writing something on his parchment with the focused attention of someone documenting a professionally significant event. "The Peveril claiming sends a notification to the artifact registry," he said, without looking up. "As of this moment, all 3 Peveril artifacts are registered to you." He paused. "Including the one currently in the possession of the Hogwarts headmaster." Harry stepped out of the circle. He picked up his wand from where he'd set it on the plinth, and turned to face the group. "One more thing," he said to Griphook. "The mail redirect on the Potter account. I want it removed now." "It dissolved with the House Potter claiming," Griphook said. "Any correspondence addressed to you through standard wizarding channels will now reach you directly. Including," he paused, and there was something in his voice that was the goblin equivalent of deliberate. "Including the 14 letters that were held in the intercept queue, which will all be delivered simultaneously to your account owl this morning." 14 letters, Sirius said. 14 over 16 years, Griphook confirmed. "The oldest is from 1981. We do not know the senders. The letters were held sealed." Harry thought about 14 letters sitting in a queue for 16 years. He thought about who might have written to a 14-month-old orphan in November 1981. He thought about his grandparents, who had been alive in 1981, who had presumably wanted very badly to reach him. He thought about his grandmother Doria, writing to a child she'd never met, not knowing where he was, putting the letter in the post and not knowing it would never arrive. "Have them sent to Grimmauld Place," he said. The accounts came next. Griphook's office, 2 floors up, with the document spread across the desk that Harry had last seen 11 days ago and several new additions. Griphook walked him through the freezing procedure with the methodical care of someone who had prepared it thoroughly, each account, each redirected income stream, each proxy authorization, listed in sequence with the countermanding order beside it. Harry signed each countermanding order. He did it without pause, going through the stack with the same focused steadiness he'd brought to the claiming chamber. Hermione sat beside him, reading each document before he signed, which was not because she doubted him but because that was who she was and how she'd always been, and right now it was exactly what he needed. When the last signature was done, Griphook collected the stack, aligned the edges against the desk with the satisfaction of a craftsman completing a piece of work, and said, "The account holds are now in effect. Any attempt to access the redirected funds or exercise the proxy voting rights will be declined. The relevant parties will receive formal notification within 24 hours. Dumbledore will know today," Sirius said. "He will," Griphook confirmed. "When the notification reaches him, he will know that the proxy has been revoked, the accounts frozen, and the Lordships claimed. He will not know yet about the 7. Today's claiming of 3 will appear in the notification. The 12th's claiming of the remaining 4 will be a subsequent notification." He paused. "I thought it preferable to give him a partial picture," Harry said. "Precisely. Enough to tell him something has changed, not enough to tell him the full scope." Harry nodded. "Good." He looked at the signed stack of countermanding orders, the physical, legal evidence of 16 years of theft undone in a single morning, and felt the same quiet satisfaction that had accompanied the claiming. Not triumph. Something cleaner than triumph. They ate lunch in a private dining room at the Leaky Cauldron that Sirius had arranged, which Tom managed with the professional discretion of a landlord who understood that privacy was worth more than gossip, at least when the customer had Sirius Black's particular manner about him. The mood around the table was buoyant in the careful way that Sirius people allowed themselves to be buoyant after things had gone well. Ron ate enthusiastically and ran strategic calculations between bites. Hermione organized her notes with the focused energy of someone who had done good work and was already thinking about the next stage. Neville was quiet but with a new quality to the quiet, lighter, less compressed. Augusta ate with the composure of someone who had waited 31 years and had developed significant tolerance for delayed gratification, but whose eyes were a fraction warmer than they'd been this morning. Sirius was talking, not about the plan, for once, but about James. Stories Harry hadn't heard, small ones, the time his father had gotten so turned around in the Hogwarts dungeon corridors that he'd been late to a transfiguration exam and Professor McGonagall had deducted points from Gryffindor and given him a week's detention simultaneously, and he'd come out of her office with a rueful grin because he'd found her impressive enough that the punishment felt like a compliment. The time Sirius and James had spent an entire summer planning an elaborate prank at the Ministry, and Lily had talked them out of it in 10 minutes by pointing out that it wouldn't actually be funny, just destructive, and they'd both stood there realizing she was right and been intensely annoyed about it. Harry listened to these stories with a specific kind of hunger, and Sirius knew it and told them well, not as eulogy, not as elegy, just as the ordinary narrative of ordinary extraordinary people who had been his parents and had been real. It was the best birthday present Sirius could have given him. The afternoon was for preparation. Hermione had arranged appointments with Amelia Bones and Griselda Marchbanks through Augusta's connections, framed as a noble house consultation rather than anything more specific. The appointments were for the following day, the 1st of August, which gave them 1 day of settled legal footing with the 3 claimed houses before they walked into rooms with senior ministry officials. Harry spent the afternoon with Griphook's documentation and Hermione's legal summary, preparing what he intended to say. Not a speech, he had no patience for speeches, and Amelia Bones was not a woman who would respond well to performance. A clear, factual presentation of the evidence, in the order that made its significance most comprehensible, with all supporting documentation available for inspection. Start with the audit, Hermione said, across the table. Not with the accusations. Let the numbers tell the story. I know, Harry said. Don't call it theft until she does. I wasn't going to. You have a tendency to be very direct. Is that a problem? Hermione looked at him for a moment. No, she said. I'm just saying, with Bones, let her reach the conclusions herself. She's a law enforcement officer. She won't want to feel like she's being guided to a verdict. Harry considered this. Fair point. With Marchbanks it's different. Marchbanks she cares about institutions. About Hogwarts, about the Wizengamot, about the framework of things. The angle for her is the institutional damage. What it means that a sitting headmaster has been controlling Wizengamot votes through fraud. What it means for every law passed in the last 16 years. That's a significant argument, Sirius said, from the other end of the table. It's the correct one for her, Hermione said firmly. Harry added it to his notes. He appreciated, not for the first time, that Hermione's particular intelligence was not just about what was true but about how truth landed differently depending on who was receiving it. It was a form of empathy that often got overlooked because it was dressed in logic. Ron came in from the kitchen with tea and set it down and sat. Have you thought about what you're going to say to Dumbledore? He asked. Not when, what? Harry looked up. He had been thinking about this, in the background, since Thursday morning at the kitchen table in Privet Drive, in the way you think about something that is certain to arrive and is important and requires more thought than the immediate urgent tasks allow. Yes, he said. And? I'm going to ask him to explain himself, Harry said. That's it. I'm going to put the audit in front of him and ask him to explain what he did and why. And then I'm going to listen. Ron looked at him. That's it? After all of this? After all of this, yes, Harry said. Because the decision about what happens to him next isn't mine alone. It's the Wisengomot's, and Bones's, and Marchbanks's, and everyone else whose trust he used. My part is to establish the truth. Not to deliver the sentence. Ron thought about this. That's very mature, he said, with the tone of someone who found the word slightly surprising in his own mouth. Shut up, Harry said. I mean it as a compliment, Ron said, grinning. Sirius was smiling too, privately, at the table. Hermione was writing, but she was smiling at the page. The letter from Dumbledore arrived at 6. Not through the standard mail, through the fire, green-flamed, the traditional method of urgent wizarding correspondence. The parchment unrolled itself on the hearthrug with the sort of dignified urgency that suggested its author had spent some time deciding how urgent to appear. Harry, I understand you have visited Gringotts today and made some significant decisions regarding the Potter estate. I am not, let me be clear, writing to challenge those decisions. You are 17 and fully entitled to manage your inheritance as you see fit. I am writing because I think there are things you may have found in the audit that require context, and I would very much like the opportunity to provide that context before any further action is taken. I believe you are a fair person, and I believe that fairness requires hearing all sides. I would like to speak with you. Tonight, if possible. With great affection, and with the full acknowledgement that I owe you a great deal of explanation, Albus the Kitchen read it in silence. Context, Ron said. He knows the proxy's been revoked, Sirius said. His voice was very controlled. The account freeze notification has reached him. He doesn't know about the other 4 houses yet, Harry said. He's coming in partially blind. He read the letter again. He says he owes me explanation. He's not denying it. He's trying to get ahead of it, Hermione said. Control the context of your understanding before you take any further action. Yes, Harry agreed. Which is exactly what he's been doing for 17 years. He took the letter to the fire and held it near the flame, not burning it, just holding it. Thinking. You're not going to go tonight, Sirius said. It was not a question. No, Harry said. I'm not ready tonight. And I'm not going to meet him privately. He set the letter on the mantelpiece. But I'm also not going to ignore it. He took out parchment and wrote, Professor Dumbledore, you're right that I found things in the audit that need explaining. I agree that explanation is owed. But I want the context you're offering in a context I can trust. Not a private conversation where the explanation becomes the only record. I'll see you at Hogwarts on the 13th. In the Great Hall, I'll let you know the time when I've finalized the arrangements. I'd like to suggest you make no changes to the estate documentation, the Wisengomot filings, or the artifact registry between now and then. Not because I'm threatening you, I'm not. But because anything done to those records between now and the 13th will become part of the evidence record, and I think we both know what it will look like. Harry he sealed it and gave it to Hedwig, who was watching from her perch with the focused attention she reserved for letters she seemed to understand were important. When she'd gone, the kitchen was quiet. 13th, Hermione said. That's after the full claiming. Yes, Harry said. You're not giving him time to prepare a defense. I'm giving him 3 days, Harry said. He can use them how he chooses. But the full claiming happens on the 12th, and when I walk into that great hall on the 13th I am Lord of 7 houses and the evidence is a matter of Gringotts' record. He paused. Anything he says in response to that is his own choice. I'm not setting a trap. I'm setting a stage. Sirius was looking at him with the expression he'd worn in the kitchen that morning, after the hug, that complicated brightness. You said your mum would have been methodical and then absolute, he said. Ron said that, Harry corrected. He was right, Sirius said. The morning of the 12th came in grey and still, the particular quality of early August mornings that feel like the year pausing to consider what comes next. Harry was at the staff entrance of Gringotts by 8. Alone. He'd thought about bringing the others, and decided against it. Not because he doubted them, but because this, the last 4 houses, and the Emery's claiming, and everything that the Emery's claiming was going to mean, felt like something that needed to be done without witnesses. Some things were private not because they were secret but because they were deeply personal, and this was between him and his blood and whatever ancient magic lived in the roots of the world. Griphook was waiting, as before. The formal robes again. Something in his expression when Harry came in alone that might have been understanding. "The instruments are ready," he said. "Good," Harry said. "Let's go." The chamber was the same cool stone, the same green-white light, the 3 lit positions on the pale metal circle glowing warm amber from the birthday claiming. Harry stepped into the circle and looked at the 4 remaining instruments on the plinth. House Slytherin. House Ravenclaw. House Gryffindor. House Emery's. He started with Slytherin. He pressed his palm to the instrument and the blood met the metal, and he felt something different this time, something that moved through him in 2 directions simultaneously. The warm amber light of the claiming, and beneath it, a deeper current, cold and precise, Parseltongue in his blood rather than his throat. The feeling of a locked door in a part of himself he'd always found uncomfortable opening and revealing, not darkness, not the taint he'd always feared, but something clean. Something that was simply his, regardless of where it came from or whose body it had traveled through on its way to him. House Slytherin. Lord Harry James Potter. Founder's lineage confirmed. He moved to Ravenclaw. Ravenclaw was bright and quick, an impression of high cold air and the particular pleasure of precision, like a very good argument landing exactly right. The amber light settled calmly at the 5th position. House Ravenclaw. Lord Harry James Potter. Founder's lineage confirmed. He moved to Gryffindor. He had expected Gryffindor to feel like coming home. What it felt like instead was recognition, not of a place but of a quality. The Gryffindor claiming felt like every moment he'd ever acted without thinking because the right thing was the only thing, every time he'd been afraid and done it anyway, every time he'd stood between something dangerous and someone who needed protecting. Not pride. Just the acknowledgement that this was, and had always been, his nature. House Gryffindor. Lord Harry James Potter. Founder's lineage confirmed. 6 lit positions on the pale metal circle. He stood before the Emery's instrument. It was the smallest of the 7. That surprised him, he'd expected the greatest to be the largest. But it sat on the plinth with a kind of absolute stillness that the others didn't quite have, as if it wasn't waiting so much as simply existing in a state of complete patience, having waited this long and being entirely prepared to wait longer. Harry looked at it for a moment. He thought about Merlin. He thought about his mother in Cokeworth, clever and fierce and utterly without pretension, carrying this in her blood without the first idea it was there. He thought about Griphook's word, ungrolak. The theft of identity. The theft of what a person is allowed to become. He pressed his palm to the instrument. The needle went deeper than the others. Significantly deeper. The blood that met the metal was more than a trace, it was a real acknowledgement, and the instrument took it seriously, reading for a long time, longer than any of the others, longer than Peveril. Harry waited. The light, when it came, was not any of the colors the others had produced. It was every color and none of them, cycling too quickly to be identified, and it was not contained to the chamber, it moved through the walls and into the stone and downward into the deep rock beneath the bank, and Harry felt the earth itself respond to it, the deep magic that lives in old stone and older blood and the particular accumulated weight of centuries of intention. Then it resolved. Into amber, like the others. Clean and warm and settled. The 7th position on the pale metal circle lit. All 7 positions glowing, the circle complete, the pale metal warm and alive with the light. House Emery's. Lord Harry James Potter. The line holds. Harry stood in the center of all seven for a long moment, and the chamber was very quiet, and somewhere above and around him the ancient city went about its ordinary morning, and somewhere in Scotland the greatest wizard of the age was sitting with a letter that had told him 3 lordships were claimed and was about to receive notification of 4 more. And the age of the careful management and the constructed cage and the boy who could only become what was needed, that age was over. Harry stepped out of the circle. He picked up his wand. "Done," he said. Griphook was looking at the 7 lit positions with an expression of complete professional composure that was nonetheless, at its edges, something more. He wrote for a moment on his parchment. Then he looked up. "The Wisengamot notification has been filed," he said. "All 7 seats are active as of 8:43 this morning. The account freezes are in effect." He paused. "And the artifact registry notification has been sent to the relevant parties." Another pause. "All of them." Harry understood what that meant. "How long before Dumbledore gets it?" "Ministry delivery runs at 9, Griphook said. "He'll have it by 10. "Good," Harry said. He looked one more time at the 7 lit positions, the complete circle, the pale metal warm in the green-white light. Then he walked out of the chamber, and the door closed behind him, and the sound it made was the sound of something permanent. Chapter 5. The Headmaster's Gambit. Amelia Bones had an office that looked like the inside of her mind, organized with military precision, every document in its place, the walls lined not with decorative portraits but with reference materials, legal precedents, organizational charts. She was a compact woman with a square jaw and a monocle that she wore not as an affectation but as a practical tool, and she had the manner of someone who had spent 30 years in law enforcement by the simple method of being harder than everything that came at her. She had listened to Harry's presentation without interrupting once. That alone told him something. Most people interrupted. They had questions, or objections, or the nervous reflex of filling silence with their own voice. Bones had sat across her desk with her hands folded and her monocle in and listened to 40 minutes of documented evidence with the absolute focused attention of a woman who was building something in her head and didn't want the construction interrupted. When Harry finished, she sat quietly for a moment. Then she picked up the audit summary. Hermione had prepared a condensed version, 12 pages, hitting every major evidentiary point with clean precision, and paged through it deliberately, not reading it for the first time but checking specific sections against her own notes. "The power of attorney document," she said. "The witness, the retired solicitor in Edinburgh. Have you approached her?" "Not yet," Harry said. "We were waiting for this conversation first." Bones looked up at him. "Why?" "Because if she confirms the irregularities, that's a criminal matter. And a criminal matter needs to go through the DMLE with the right person steering it, or it gets buried." He paused. "I wanted to know who the right person was before we handed them the thread." A very brief silence. Then Bones said, "That was well thought out." "Hermione thought of it," Harry said honestly. Bones glanced at Hermione, who was sitting beside Harry with her folder and her precise expression, and gave her a nod of the kind that cost a great deal coming from Amelia Bones and meant correspondingly more. "The question of who investigates Dumbledore inside the DMLE is not simple," Bones said, returning to the document. "He has friends in this building. Not corrupt friends, necessarily, people who genuinely believe in him, who will interpret any investigation as politically motivated until the evidence makes that impossible." She set the document down. "I can manage that. But it requires that the evidence is presented in the right order and that no one with a prior relationship to Dumbledore has access to the preliminary investigation file." She looked at Harry directly. "That means I run it personally, with a team I select, and nothing goes to the broader DMLE until I'm satisfied the file is complete." "That works," Harry said. "It also means this conversation never happened," she said. "Officially, I received the audit through standard channels following the Wisengamot notification of your lordship claims." She paused. The notification reached my office this morning at 9:15, incidentally. 7 houses. That is significant. Yes, Harry said. She looked at him for another moment, the monocle doing its work, the analytical intelligence behind it reading something in him beyond the documents. Lord Potter, she said, and it was the first time she'd used the title, testing it. I want you to understand what you've set in motion. You are not just challenging one man. Dumbledore's influence runs through 40 years of wizarding law, 30 years of ministry appointments, every major piece of legislation touching noble house governance since the mid-70s. When this becomes public, and it will become public, the question of what was done under his influence, what might need to be revisited or repealed, that is going to be a generational reckoning. I know, Harry said. You're prepared for that? I didn't start this to be prepared for it, Harry said. I started it because it's the truth and the truth was being hidden. What happens to the institutions after, that's their problem to solve, not mine. I can help. But I can't solve it for them. He paused. I don't think anyone should solve it for them. Bones looked at him for a long moment. Then she sat back slightly, and something in her expression shifted, not warmth exactly, but the satisfaction of a person who has been worrying about a thing and found the thing to be better than they feared. I'll be at Gringotts on the 12th, she said. What time? Already happened, Harry said. This morning. She looked at him with something sharpening behind the monocle. You moved faster than I expected. Yes, Harry said. I generally do. Griselda Marchbanks was a different conversation entirely. She was 93 years old and looked about 70, which Harry attributed to the particular resilience of people who had spent a long time being principled in uncomfortable situations. She lived in a tall thin house in Hogsmeade that was stuffed with books and had a garden that appeared to be conducting an independent and successful war against all attempts at cultivation. She received them in a sitting room where the chairs were old and comfortable and the fire was lit because it was always lit. Augusta had come for this meeting, which turned out to be the right call. The 2 old women occupied opposite chairs by the fire the way longtime adversaries occupy space, with the ease of people who had been navigating each other's personalities for 70 years and had stopped finding it difficult. There was affection in it, Harry could see that, the deep affection of people who had disagreed loudly and often and respected each other completely. Marchbanks had looked at Harry when he came in and said, Potter. Yes. I examined your father for his NEWTS. He was exceptional at transfiguration and appalling at potions and had the kind of intelligence that made him occasionally insufferable. She paused. You look like him. So I'm told, Harry said. Sit down. He sat. He presented the evidence. He was less formal than he'd been with Bones. Marchbanks was not a law enforcement officer and didn't want to be treated like one. He told it more plainly, more directly, and he watched her face as he did. She didn't interrupt either. But her face was not still the way Bones's had been. It moved, worked through what he was telling her, processed it, and Harry could see the processing because it wasn't just intellectual. Marchbanks had known Albus Dumbledore since they were both at school. She had been his colleague, his sometime ally, his occasional opponent, for 7 decades. The evidence Harry was laying in front of her was not just a legal document. It was a story about someone she had known for her entire adult life. When he finished, she sat for a long time. The 1977 letter, she said finally. Yes, Harry said. His handwriting. Independently verified. She was quiet again. Augusta, across from her, said nothing. The fire shifted. I want to tell you, Marchbanks said carefully, that Albus has been many things over the years, and not all of them straightforward. I've known for a long time that his relationship with power was complicated. He sought it and feared it simultaneously, which is one of the more dangerous combinations in a person of his ability. She paused. I argued with him in 1981 about the guardianship. I didn't know the specifics, I didn't have the documents you have, but I knew something was irregular, and I told him so, and he explained it to me with such gentleness and such apparent concern for you that she stopped. Set her teacup down with precision. I accepted the explanation. Because I wanted to. Augusta said, quietly, we all wanted to, Griselda. That was rather the point. Marchbanks looked at her old friend. Something passed between them, a long acknowledgement, private and complicated, that Harry didn't try to read. He's going to say he was protecting you, Marchbanks said, turning back to Harry. I expect so. And the maddening thing, she said, with a sharpness that was almost anger, is that he will mean it. That is the worst of it, Potter. He will look you in the eye and he will explain what he did in terms that are coherent and even, in some lights, defensible, and he will mean every word. He genuinely believes the architecture of what he built was necessary. She paused. He is wrong. But he believes he is right. Do you understand what that means for how you approach him? It means I can't make him wrong by being angry, Harry said. He has to understand it himself. Marchbanks looked at him for a moment. Augusta, she said, I think I owe you an apology. For what? Augusta said. For not listening more carefully in 1981. She said it simply, without ceremony. Then she turned back to Harry. I'll be at the Gringotts session. And I'll support the investigation. She paused. And when you speak to him, I'd like to be present. Not as a witness for legal purposes. As someone who has the right to hear it. I'd welcome that, Harry said. The morning of the 13th began with owls. 3 of them, all arriving within the space of an hour. The first was from Dumbledore, confirming the meeting in the Great Hall at 11 o'clock, with a brevity and lack of his characteristic warmth that told Harry more than a longer letter would have. The second was from the Gringotts registry, confirming the formal entry of all 7 lordships in the official record and the scheduling of a full session for the 23rd of August to address the matters raised by the Gringotts audit. The third was from Griphook, containing a single line, the Edinburgh solicitor has agreed to give a sworn goblin witness statement. Date to be confirmed pending your instruction. Harry read all 3 over breakfast. He was calm, the particular calibrated calm of someone who has been building towards something for long enough that arriving at it feels less like a storm and more like a very large door opening. Hermione was watching him from across the table. How are you? She asked. Fine, he said. She looked at him steadily. Really fine, he said. Not performing. I've been thinking about what I want to say to him since I read the audit. I know what it is. What is it? He was quiet for a moment. The truth, he said. Just the truth. What he did, what it cost, what needs to happen now. Nothing beyond that. She held his gaze for another moment, then nodded. Okay, she said simply. Ron came in from the hallway. Cars are here, he said. Serious as being, he's in a mood. He's fine, Harry said, standing. He's coming. Try and stop him. Harry didn't try. Hogwarts in August had a particular quality, alive without being populated, the school's inherent magic present and breathing without the noise of students to compete with it. The grounds were green and overgrown in the specific August way, the castle warm where the sun hit its southern walls, cool and dim in the shadowed corridors within. McGonagall met them at the entrance. She had clearly been expecting them, or expecting something, because she was in her formal teaching robes and her expression had the careful neutrality of a woman managing a situation she found painful and intended to manage well regardless of the pain. Harry, she said, looking at him with something that was sharp and warm simultaneously. Professor, he said. Thank you for being here. I live here, she said dryly. And someone needs to keep the peace. She looked at the group behind him, Sirius, Hermione, Ron, Neville, Augusta, and Marchbanks, with the assessment of a Transfiguration professor taking stock. Griselda, she said. "Minerva," Marchbanks said. "He's in the Great Hall," McGonagall said to Harry. "He's been there since 9. She paused. "He seemed subdued." Harry nodded. He looked at the group. "I'm going in first," he said. "Alone. For the first few minutes. I need it to start between him and me." No one argued. Sirius looked like he wanted to but checked it, which Harry appreciated. He walked through the entrance hall, past the marble staircase, through the tall doors of the Great Hall. Dumbledore was sitting at the head of the staff table. Not behind it, in front of it, in a plain chair that he'd pulled to the center of the dais, with no table between him and the body of the hall. No desk, no barrier. Harry noticed this. It was a choice, deliberate, communicative, the choice of a man who had decided this conversation required no defenses and intended to demonstrate that by his physical positioning. He looked old this morning. Harry had always thought of Dumbledore as ageless in the particular way that very powerful people sometimes seemed ageless, presence overwhelming the evidence of years. This morning the years were visible. He was in blue robes, not his most formal, and he was sitting with his hands folded in his lap and his half-moon spectacles on and his silver hair loose, and he looked like what he was, a man who was old and had done something that couldn't be undone and knew it. He looked up when Harry came in. Harry walked the length of the Great Hall. He had walked this hall hundreds of times, to his seat at the Gryffindor table, to the front for exams, to the doors on the far end in various states of urgency. He walked it differently now. Not performing confidence, not suppressing fear. Simply walking towards something that needed to happen and being ready for it. He sat in the chair across from Dumbledore. Not a matching chair, Harry had pulled up a bench, the ordinary kind from the Gryffindor table, and sat on it with his forearms on his knees and his wand in his jacket and the audit report in his hand. He set the audit on the floor between them. "You've seen this," he said. "I've seen the notification from Gringotts," Dumbledore said. His voice was the same, warm, measured, precise. But something was different in it, some bottom note missing, and Harry identified it after a moment as the absence of management. There was no strategy in his voice this morning. Just the voice itself. Not the full document. "This is the full document," Harry said. "You can read it now, or you can take my summary. Either way." "Your summary," Dumbledore said. "Please." Harry looked at him. He thought about all the times in this hall that Dumbledore had looked at him with those eyes, from behind the staff table at the beginning of term, in the aftermath of the tournament, the quiet moments after the terrible ones when Dumbledore had offered comfort in a voice like this one and Harry had taken it because he needed it and it was offered and it had been real, he believed it had been real, he kept his voice level. "You placed a proxy redirect on my mail in November 1981, Harry said. 3 days after my parents died. You filed a power of attorney over the Potter estate without notifying my grandfather, Charles Potter, who was alive. You suppressed 6 noble house designations that were rightfully mine. You held Sirius's will in a liaison queue for 12 years. You read every legal and personal letter addressed to me for 16 years. And you knew, from 1977, 4 years before I was born, that my mother's blood carried 6 of those 7 inheritances, and you chose to bury that knowledge because," he paused. "Because of that sentence. The one you wrote in 1977. Do you want me to quote it?" Dumbledore was very still. "No," he said quietly. "I remember it." "Then tell me why," Harry said. "Not the version that makes it sound like protection. The actual reason." Silence. The Great Hall was extraordinary in its emptiness, the enchanted ceiling showing August sky, pale blue and still, the long tables bare and gleaming. A room built for community, for hundreds of voices and the clamor of young people, and in it this morning just 2 people and the specific weight of 16 years. Dumbledore looked at Harry for a long moment. His blue eyes, behind the half-moon spectacles, were very direct. The actual reason, he said, is that I was afraid. Harry hadn't expected that. I was afraid of what you were, Dumbledore continued, with the deliberate care of someone choosing precision over comfort. Not afraid of you, Harry, I want to be clear about that. I was afraid of what would happen to you, and to the world, if the full scope of your inheritance was understood before Voldemort was defeated. A child who is the Lord of 7 houses, heir to Merlin's own line, with the magical and political power those designations carry, that child becomes the most valuable thing in the wizarding world. Not just to the side of light. He paused. Voldemort would have restructured his entire campaign around possessing you rather than destroying you. So you destroyed the target by hiding the treasure, Harry said. Yes. And the collateral damage, Harry looked at him. My grandparents. Charles died in December 1979. Doria in 1985. Augusta Longbottom believes they were killed because they got too close to what you'd hidden. A change moved through Dumbledore's face. It was not the change Harry had expected, not denial, not evasion. It was something that looked like grief, genuine and old and unresolved. I know, he said. You know? I know that Charles was getting close. I knew it at the time. I made decisions that, I told myself, were about protecting the larger picture. I told myself that the individual tragedy was smaller than the war that was coming. He stopped. I was wrong about that. I have known for a long time that I was wrong about that. But you didn't stop, Harry said. After the war was won in 1981. You didn't undo any of it. You kept the proxy. You kept the mail redirect. You kept the suppressions. No, Dumbledore said. I didn't stop. Why? The Great Hall was very quiet. Dumbledore looked at his folded hands for a moment. Then back at Harry. Because Voldemort wasn't gone, he said. I knew it. I've always known it. The manner of his death in 1981 was not the death of a man who could die like that, not with the magic he'd made of himself. He persisted in some form. I didn't know the form, not for years. But I knew that when he returned, would need you ready. He paused. And I knew what you were capable of, if you carried all of this too early. I was afraid you would become a power unto yourself, outside the war, outside the structures, pursuing your own inheritance at the expense of the fight. Harry looked at him. You thought if I knew what I was, I wouldn't do what you needed me to do. I thought, Dumbledore said carefully, that there was a risk of it. And with so much at stake, so many lives dependent on the prophecy being fulfilled, I chose to manage the risk. You chose to manage me. Yes. The word was simple and undeflected. I chose to manage you. I chose, every year, when I reviewed what you'd been told and what you'd been kept from, to continue the management. Because I was certain, increasingly certain, with each year you survived and each year you grew into exactly the person the fight needed, that I was right. And now? Harry said. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Now I am sitting in this hall talking to the Lord of 7 Houses who has just turned 17 and frozen my proxy accounts and arranged a Wizengamot investigation into my conduct, he said, with a faint and complicated ghost of something that might have been wry acknowledgement, and I am finding it very difficult to argue that my management of the situation was a success. Despite everything, something in Harry's chest moved with an emotion he hadn't expected, not laughter, but adjacent to it, the complicated response to someone you're furious with being genuinely, unexpectedly honest. There's more, Harry said. Augusta Longbottom has been building a case for 31 years. She has documentation of everything. The power of attorney irregularities, the witness solicitation, the deaths of my grandparents. He paused. And she has a name. Someone who was operating alongside the estate theft. Someone who was protecting your arrangement because it served a different purpose than yours. He looked at Dumbledore steadily. Someone who was, I think, using your management of me the way you were using me, as a means to an end. And their end wasn't the same as yours. Something changed in Dumbledore's face. It was the first time in the conversation that Harry saw something in him that was not measured. It came and went quickly, but it was there, a crack in the composure, the expression of a man who has just heard a confirmation of something he has been dreading for a long time. "You know who it is," Harry said. Dumbledore was quiet. "Dumbledore." "Yes," he said. "I know who it is." He took a slow breath. "I have suspected it for several years. I lacked the standing to prove it, or perhaps I lacked the will. They were, in a position of trust, and proving it would require resources and political standing that he stopped." "That you had diverted," Harry said. Another pause. "Yes." Harry sat back slightly. He looked at the ceiling of the great hall, the August sky drifting overhead, indifferent and beautiful. He thought about Griphook's warning. An enemy with a partially good argument. He thought about what it meant that Dumbledore had been protecting the arrangement partly because the alternative was losing the resource he needed, and partly, he could see this now, in the conversation, in the things Dumbledore wasn't saying as much as the things he was, because he was afraid of whoever was behind it. Because the shadow behind the theft was something that had made even Albus Dumbledore reluctant to look directly at it. "Who is it?" Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him. The blue eyes were very direct, and beneath the grief and the honesty of this conversation Harry could see something that had always been there, the fundamental quality that made Dumbledore both magnificent and catastrophic, the absolute certainty that his assessments were correct and his decisions necessary. "Before I tell you," Dumbledore said, "I need you to understand something. What I did, the suppressions, the proxy, the management, was wrong. I understand it was wrong. I am not asking for forgiveness and I am not presenting context as excuse." He paused. "But what I am about to tell you cannot be heard as something that diminishes the wrongness of what I did. The existence of a larger threat does not justify my choices. I need you to hear it that way." "Tell me," Harry said. Dumbledore said the name. The great hall was so quiet that Harry heard his own heartbeat. The name was not, on its surface, surprising. In retrospect, with everything Augusta had said, with the pattern of the protection and the deaths and the careful management of the aftermath, it made a cold, logical sense that the name would be what it was. A person who had been in a position of institutional authority for decades. A person who had watched the war and the aftermath with the patient, careful attention of someone with long plans. A person who had never, in Harry's experience, seemed to have any agenda at all, which was itself a kind of signature. "They've been watching the Horcrux hunt," Dumbledore said quietly. "They know about the Horcruxes, not all of them, but enough. And they have been waiting, not for Voldemort to be defeated, but for the precise moment when the defeat becomes inevitable and the person who achieved it is briefly at their most exhausted and their most exposed." He paused. "They want to be the person standing beside you when the world ends and remakes itself. They want what your 7 lordships represent. Not for you. For themselves." Harry sat with this. "They killed my grandparents," he said. "I believe so." "Yes. To protect your arrangement, which protected their access to me." "Yes. So they used you," Harry said. "The way you used me." Dumbledore said nothing. He didn't need to. Harry looked at the man across from him, the architect of 16 years of careful management, sitting in an empty chair in an empty hall, having just done the most unmanaged thing he had probably done in decades, told the truth because it needed to be told and there was no more mileage left in strategy. "Right," Harry said. He picked up the audit from the floor and stood. "Here's what happens now. You cooperate with the DMLE investigation. You give Amelia Bones everything she asks for. You don't minimize, you don't contextualize to the press before the Wisengamot session, you don't contact the witnesses we've identified." He paused. In exchange, I will ensure the Wisengamot investigation focuses on the institutional damage rather than criminal prosecution, which means you will almost certainly lose your positions, Chief Warlock, Headmaster, whatever the investigation determines is compromised, but you will not face Azkaban. Dumbledore looked at him. You're bargaining with me. I'm telling you the terms I'm willing to advocate for with Bones and the Wisengamot, Harry said. What they ultimately decide is not mine to control. I said that to Hermione too. He looked at Dumbledore steadily. But I can advocate for proportionality if the cooperation is genuine. Silence. And in return, Dumbledore said slowly, you want information about everything you know, Harry said. About the shadow operation. The person behind the estate protection. The Horcrux situation. All of it. Full cooperation with me as well as with Bones. He paused. You've been carrying this alone for too long and it's made you make decisions that hurt people. You don't have to carry it anymore. But you do have to hand it over. Dumbledore looked at Harry for a very long time. Then he said, you are considerably more than I planned for. I know, Harry said. That was rather the point of doing it this way. The ghost of something moved across Dumbledore's face, pain, and beneath it, something that might have been pride, and beneath even that the quiet devastation of a man who can see, finally and clearly, what his choices cost. All right, he said. The doors to the Great Hall opened. Sirius came in first, because of course he did, unable to wait any longer, and behind him Hermione and Ron and Neville and Augusta and Marchbanks, and McGonagall following because she was McGonagall and this was her hall and she had the right. Dumbledore looked at the people filing into the hall with the attention of someone reading a map and recognizing the scope of what had been assembled. He looked longest at Augusta. Augusta, he said, and his voice carried something that was not an apology, it was too late and too insufficient for that, but was its distant relative. An acknowledgement. A naming of the weight. Augusta Longbottom looked at him across the empty hall. She said nothing. She sat down at the Gryffindor table with the posture of a woman who has waited 31 years for this moment and is not going to rush it now. McGonagall sat beside her. Marchbanks, the oldest person in the room, sat at the far end, folded her hands, and waited with the patience of 9 decades. Harry remained standing. Right, he said to the assembled room. Let's start from the beginning. It took 4 hours. Dumbledore talked. Not in the measured, constructed way he usually talked, not with the architecture of a man who was also, always, managing perception, but in the plainer voice that had emerged in the first minutes of the conversation, the voice without strategy. He told them about 1977 and the genealogical report. He told them about the power of attorney and the witness and the Edinburgh solicitor who had been told the filing was a protective emergency measure and had been too junior and too trusting to push back. He told them about Charles Potter and the investigation in 1979 and the choice Dumbledore had made to obstruct it, not through direct action but through the strategic application of misdirection and delay, which was perhaps the most damning thing about it, that the obstructions had all been deniable, all been technically innocent, all been things that could be explained away. He told them about the shadow figure. He gave what he knew, events, patterns, a dossier of circumstantial evidence he'd assembled over years that by itself proved nothing but in aggregate was devastating. Hermione wrote all of it down. Ron tracked the timeline on Augusta's schematic. Neville sat very still and listened, and at certain points his hands tightened on the bench but he made no sound. Sirius sat at the far end of the table from Dumbledore and did not speak and did not look away. McGonagall, twice, asked questions. They were short, surgical, pointed at specific inconsistencies, and Dumbledore answered them without deflection. The second time, when his answer was particularly hard to hear, she looked at her folded hands for a moment and then back up, and Harry thought about what it meant to have admired someone for 60 years and learn in an afternoon the architecture of what that admiration had been built on. At the end of the 4 hours, Harry stood. The Wisengamot session is the 23rd, he said. Augusta's documentation, the Gringotts audit, and the sworn statement from the Edinburgh solicitor will form the evidentiary record. He looked at Dumbledore. You've agreed to cooperate. I'm going to hold you to that. I understand, Dumbledore said. The other matter, the shadow figure, Harry said. That doesn't go to the Wizengamot yet. It goes to Bones alone, privately, while we build the evidentiary case. We don't move on that until we have what we need to make it stick, because this person is more careful than you were and has been hiding for longer. Nods around the table. One more thing, Harry said. He looked at Dumbledore. The Elder Wand. Silence. Dumbledore looked at him. In his eyes, the blue, the half-moon spectacles, all of it, Harry could see the assessment running, the old instinct for strategy still present even here, even now. It's in my study, Dumbledore said. I know, Harry said. I'd like it today. Another pause. Then Dumbledore reached into his robes. The wand was everything and nothing like Harry expected, not impressive on its surface, old dark wood, simple in its lines. But the moment Dumbledore held it out, Harry felt it from across the table, that low resonant quality from the claiming chamber, the same vibration in deep stone. He reached out and took it. The wand settled into his hand like something that had always known the direction it was traveling. Dumbledore watched his hand close around it. Something in his face went through a complicated journey and arrived at acceptance. It will feel different to you than it did to me, he said quietly. For it, the difference between winning and inheriting is, he stopped. It has been waiting for the right holder for a very long time. I know, Harry said. He looked at the wand in his hand. He looked at the empty great hall, the August sky still drifting past overhead, the long tables still bare, the people around him each carrying the weight of what they'd heard in their own particular way. Outside, the grounds of Hogwarts were green and warm and quiet. In 10 days, the Wizengamot would convene, and everything said in this hall would become the foundation of a reckoning that would echo through the wizarding world for a generation. But right now it was Thursday afternoon in August, and the sun was moving toward the west, and the greatest wizard of the age was sitting in an empty chair with his hands in his lap and no wand in his possession for the first time in 80 years, and Harry Potter, Lord of 7 Houses, heir of Merlin, his mother's son in every possible sense, stood in the hall where he'd grown up and felt, for the first time in his life, entirely free. Chapter 6, The Seventh Seal. 10 days was both a long time and not enough. Harry spent the first 3 of them at Grimmauld Place working with Griphook on the evidentiary package for the Wizengamot session, not just the audit, but the full architecture of 31 years, every document from Augusta's box cross-referenced against the Gringotts records and the sworn statement from the Edinburgh solicitor, whose name was Margaret Firth and who had travelled from Scotland to London on the 15th and sat in Griphook's office and given 4 hours of testimony in the calm, precise voice of a woman who had spent 30 years quietly waiting for someone to ask. She'd known. Not the full scope, she'd been 23 and she'd been lied to about the nature of the filing. But she'd felt, in the years since, the particular discomfort of someone who had done something that was technically procedural and morally wrong and had lacked the tools to act on the discomfort until now. When she finished her testimony she looked at Harry and said, "I'm sorry. I should have asked more questions at the time." Harry had told her that the person who should have made it safe to ask questions was the one who hadn't, and that the responsibility wasn't hers. She'd left looking lighter. The Bones investigation moved with the controlled speed of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. She'd identified 3 DMLE officers she trusted completely, pulled the original ministry filing records, and opened a formal inquiry under the Noble House fraud provisions, a category of legislation that had not been invoked in 40 years because the last major case of Noble House fraud had been 41 years ago. The inquiry was not yet public. It would become public at the Wizengamot session, simultaneously with the presentation of the audit. The shadow figure, the name Dumbledore had given them, was the piece that Harry kept coming back to in the quiet hours. He'd read Dumbledore's dossier twice, then given it to Hermione, who had read it 4 times and then sat very still for a while before saying, with characteristic precision, "The pattern is consistent. But the evidence is circumstantial on every individual point. To make it actionable we need one thing that's direct." "What kind of direct?" Harry had asked. "Something they did personally. Something we can trace to them without the chain of proxies they've been using." She'd paused. The grandmother. Doria Potter. The anomalous trace in the cardiac tissue that the St. Mungo's healer flagged in 1985. If that trace can be identified as a specific curse, and the goblin bloodline analysts can apparently read magical traces in inherited records as well as living blood, can they read it from the post-mortem record? Harry had asked. Griphook says yes, she'd said. With sufficient documentation. It's apparently what they call a deep trace. It leaves a permanent mark in the family bloodline record the way a scar leaves a mark on skin. She'd looked at him steadily. If the curse matches something in the shadow figure's known magical profile, get it done, Harry had said. That had been 4 days ago. This morning, the 18th, Griphook had sent a letter containing 3 lines. The trace has been identified. It matches the magical profile in the dossier. The documentation is complete. Harry had read it over breakfast and then sat quietly for a while. He thought about Doria Potter, who had written letters to a child she'd never met and died before they were delivered. He thought about Charles Potter, who had asked the right questions and died for them. He thought about the word Augusta had used, ungrolak, except she'd used the English version, theft of identity, and thought about how theft, when it escalated to the point of murder, became something else entirely, something that required a different kind of reckoning. He wrote back to Griphook, add it to the file. Full documentation. This goes to Bones today and to the Wiesengemot on the 23rd. Then he picked up the Elder Wand from the desk beside him, where it had been sitting since he'd brought it home from Hogwarts, and held it for a moment in the morning light. He'd been using it sparingly. Not from fear, from attention. The Elder Wand was not like his Holly Wand, which was familiar and personal in the way of something that had chosen him at 11 and grown up alongside him. The Elder Wand was older and more precise, and it responded to intention with an immediacy that his Holly Wand had never quite achieved, like the difference between a good instrument and a masterwork. When he'd first practiced with it privately in his room at Grimmauld Place, the spells had come with a sharpness that was almost startling, every charm exactly what he meant it to be, nothing more and nothing less. He thought about what Dumbledore had said. It has been waiting for the right holder for a very long time. He set it down and went downstairs. Sirius was in the kitchen with a map of the ministry's administrative structure and a mug of tea that had gone cold, which was his general approach to tea. He made it, forgot it, and drank it cold rather than admit he'd forgotten it. He looked up when Harry came in. Griphook's letter came, Harry said. Sirius looked at him. The trace. Yes. A silence. Sirius looked at the map. He picked up his cold tea and drank some of it with the focused attention of someone channeling feeling into action. 5 days, he said. 5 days, Harry agreed. He sat down. How are you doing with it? With knowing who killed your grandparents? Yes. Sirius set the mug down with precision. He looked at Harry with the directness that was one of his fundamental qualities. I'm angry, he said. I've been angry for 12 years about a lot of things and I'm used to managing it. This is another thing to manage. He paused. What I keep coming back to is that they were using Dumbledore the way Dumbledore was using you. And Dumbledore, in his arrogance, in his certainty, let himself be used because he couldn't imagine being the lesser player in someone else's game. He looked at the map. The whole architecture of the last 30 years is people using people. And the person at the bottom of it was always you. Not anymore, Harry said. No, Sirius said. Not anymore. They sat together in the kitchen with the August morning coming through the windows. The house had changed in the weeks since Harry had arrived, not structurally, not in its fundamental nature, but in its atmosphere. Something had shifted, some decades-long tension in the air, as if the house had been waiting for something to resolve and was beginning to release. Even Creature had been less actively malevolent, though Harry attributed that partly to a frank conversation he'd had with the old house elf about the Black family's actual history, which Creature had received with suspicious attention and had not, so far, visibly dismissed. "There's something else," Harry said. Sirius waited. "Griphook told me last week that the Emery's claiming isn't complete." Sirius looked at him. "What do you mean?" "You claimed it. On the 12th. The blood acknowledgement establishes the legal standing," Harry said. "But House Emery's apparently has a secondary requirement that no other house has. Something Griphook called a lineage trial." He paused. "It's old magic. Older than the bank, older than the compact. The Goblin blood record describes it as a test that the Emery's line built into its inheritance, not a trial in the adversarial sense, more like a recognition. The line confirms itself in the air. It has to happen in a specific place." "Where?" Sirius said. "There's a chamber," Harry said. "Deep below Gringotts. Below the claiming chamber, below everything that the standard bank operations use. Griphook says it was part of the original Goblin-Wizard Compact, a sealed space that predates the bank itself, built on the site where Merlin and the Goblin Elders established the first agreement." He paused. "Griphook says no one has entered it since the compact was signed. He's not entirely sure what's in it." Sirius was very still. "He's not sure," Sirius repeated. "He says the records describe it in broad terms, but the specifics were, apparently Merlin's contribution to the compact was to make the chamber self-contained, self-governing. Whatever the lineage trial involves, it's between the heir and the magic of the line." Harry looked at his godfather. "I'm going tomorrow. Griphook will open the chamber. After that, it's me alone." "Harry, I'm not asking permission," Harry said, not unkindly. "I'm telling you because you're my godfather and you have the right to know." He paused. "I'm not afraid of it." Sirius looked at him for a long moment. The complicated brightness was back in his expression, had been there consistently since the claiming, as if Harry's presence in his fully realized form, the 7 houses and the Elder Wand and the decisions made without apology, had resolved some long-held tension in Sirius too, some way he'd been carrying the burden of what Harry was supposed to be. "All right," Sirius said. "But I'm at the bank when you go in." "Okay," Harry said. "And if you're not out in 3 hours I'm coming in after you." "Griphook will argue about that." "Griphook can write me a strongly worded letter," Sirius said, and picked up his cold tea. The 19th of August was warm and cloudless, the kind of high summer day that London occasionally produced as if to prove it was capable of it. Harry walked to Gringotts through the alley at 8 in the morning, and this time he didn't keep his collar up. He walked through the familiar cobblestoned crowd, the back-to-school shoppers, the potion ingredient vendors, the small clusters of people whose conversation stopped briefly when they recognized him, and he met the looks without deflection. Not performance, not posturing. Just presence. Some of the looks were new. He'd noticed it in the past week, since the Weisengamot notification of his claims had become public knowledge, a shift in how people held themselves when they saw him, a recalibration. The wizarding world had known Harry Potter as the boy who lived for 16 years, a symbol, a story. The idea of him as the Lord of 7 Houses was something they were in the process of processing, and the processing was visible on their faces. He didn't mind. Let them process. Griphook was waiting at the staff entrance with the formal robes again and an expression of focused gravity. "The chamber is ready," he said. "Or rather, the passage to it is open. The chamber itself is as it has always been." "Any change to what you told me last week?" Harry asked. "No." Griphook paused. "I wish I could tell you more about what to expect. I can only tell you that the Goblin records describe the experience of the lineage trial in the accounts of the people who witnessed Merlin complete it, at the time of the compact, and those accounts are, impressionistic. Impressionistic how? They describe light, Griphook said. And a reckoning. And Merlin emerging from the chamber looking, their word is settled. As if something that had been unresolved had resolved. He paused. Beyond that, we have nothing. Harry nodded. That's fine. Sirius came through the staff entrance behind him. He looked at Griphook. Griphook looked at him. A brief, complicated mutual assessment. 3 hours, Sirius said. Lord Black, the chamber is a sealed magical environment. I cannot guarantee. 3 hours, Sirius said again. Griphook made a sound that was the goblin equivalent of accepting an argument under protest. 3 hours, he said. They went down. Deeper than the claiming chamber. Deeper than the vaults, deeper than the tracks that the carts ran on, deeper than any level of the bank that Harry had ever been in or heard described. The passage was not carved, it was natural stone, a vein in the deep rock of London, lit by no lamp at all but by some quality of the stone itself, a faint luminescence that was neither warm nor cold but simply present. The passage descended for a long time. Harry counted steps for a while and stopped because the number became unhelpful. Griphook walked ahead with the silent certainty of a professional who had prepared thoroughly for something unprecedented. At one point the passage narrowed enough that they had to turn sideways to pass through, and at another point it opened into a brief chamber that was clearly natural, water-carved, with the smell of deep earth and old stone. The door, when they reached it, was not what Harry expected. He had expected something grand, an ancient gate, inscribed stone, the visual vocabulary of significant magical spaces. What he found instead was a section of wall where the rock had been touched, at some point unimaginably long ago, by a hand that had pressed intent into it. There was no visible seam or hinge. There was simply the rock, and within the rock, a shape that was felt rather than seen, a door-shaped possibility, waiting. Griphook looked at it. I open the passage, he said. The door responds to the blood of the heir. He placed his palm flat on the stone and spoke a single goblin word that Harry didn't catch, and the passage opened, not swinging or sliding but simply becoming open, the way a space becomes available when the thing filling it steps aside. The chamber beyond was dark. Harry turned to Sirius. Sirius was looking at him with the expression of a man who wanted very badly to say several things and had decided, correctly, that this was not the moment. He gave Harry the short nod, the one that compressed a longer emotional expression. Harry walked through the door. The darkness lasted approximately 2 seconds. Then the chamber lit, from the walls, from the floor, from some sourceless quality of the space itself, with a light that was the same silver white that the Peveril claiming had produced, but steadier. The chamber was not large. It was roughly circular, with a ceiling that was higher than the wall suggested it should be, and at its center there was nothing, no object, no altar, no instrument. Just a circular space of open floor and above it the silver-white light gathering at the apex of the ceiling like a held breath. Harry walked to the center and stood. He waited. Nothing happened for a moment. Then the light moved, slowly, from the ceiling, beginning to descend in a way that was not quite visible and not quite invisible, the way heat moves above summer road. It came down toward him in a column, unhurried, and when it reached him, it went through him. Not painfully. Not dramatically. It simply passed through the physical fact of him the way water passes through cloth, encountering him, reading him, moving through every layer of what he was with a thoroughness that had no parallel in his experience. Not legilimency was invasive, the sensation of another mind forcing entry. This was something else. An assessment, but one that didn't feel external. It felt like being read by something that was part of him and had always been part of him and was simply, at last, completing a circuit that had been open since his birth. He saw things. Not visions in the dramatic sense, not images that played out before him like a pensieve. More like the sensation of understanding, dropping into him in sequential pieces, each one complete. He understood his mother's laugh, not heard it, understood it, the quality of intelligence and warmth behind it, the way she'd thought and moved through the world. He understood his grandfather Charles, the uprightness of the man, the stubborn investigative intelligence that had asked the right questions in October of 1979 and been killed for them. He understood Doria Potter, who had written letters to a child she couldn't reach and had kept writing until she couldn't anymore. He understood Merlin. Not personally, not the way you understand someone you know. More the way you understand a handwriting in a document, the personality beneath the words. What the trial was giving him was the accumulated intentionality of every person through whose blood the Emery's line had run, not their memories but their essence, the distilled quality of what they'd been. And at the root of it all, the oldest, the deepest, the most fundamental, was something that was not a person at all anymore. Just a principle. A commitment to magic used in service of understanding rather than domination, connection rather than control. The light was very bright now, and Harry stood in it with his eyes open. He thought about the sentence from the audit. The boy cannot know what he is until we are certain he is what we need him to be. He thought about what it meant that the trial, this ancient, self-governing magic, designed by someone who had understood exactly what inheritance truly meant, made no demand of him at all. No test to pass. No threshold to clear. No designation of what he was required to be. Just recognition. You are what you are, the light seemed to say, if light could say anything. You have always been what you are. We are simply confirming the record. He stood in it for a long time, he had no way to measure how long. The deep chamber was outside of ordinary time in some quality he couldn't articulate, and when it finally resolved, when the column of light drew back upward and the chamber returned to its simple silver-white ambience, he felt the same thing Griphook's records had described. Settled. Not changed, he was exactly who he'd been when he walked through the door. But settled, the way a door is different once its lock has properly turned, the way something is different once the thing that was almost right becomes fully right. He breathed in the old stone smell of the deep chamber. Then he turned and walked out. Sirius was sitting on the floor of the passage when Harry came through, his back against the stone wall and his arms resting on his knees, with the look of someone who had been through his own internal experience in the interval. He looked up when Harry emerged. 2 hours and 14 minutes, he said. That's well within the limit, Harry said. Yes. Sirius stood. He looked at Harry for a moment with the full directness of the expression he'd been managing all morning. How are you? Good, Harry said. And then, because settled was a word Griphook had used and it was accurate, settled. Sirius looked at him for another moment and then did something he'd done on Harry's birthday morning, clapped him on the shoulder, once, firmly, the physical vocabulary of a man who felt things deeply and expressed them economically. Griphook, who had been standing at a respectful distance, approached. He looked at Harry with the professional attention of the best auditor in the bank and said nothing, which said everything. Complete? Harry asked. Complete, Griphook confirmed. All 7 houses, all primary and secondary requirements fulfilled. He paused, and the pause itself was weighted. The record is now as it should be. Harry nodded. He picked up both his wands from the inside of his jacket, the Holly and the Elder, the one that had chosen him at 11 and the one that had been waiting for him since birth, and turned them over in his hands once. 2 different instruments. 2 different registers. He pocketed the Elder wand and held on to the Holly one, the familiar one, the one that was simply his. Let's go, he said. The 23rd was a Tuesday, which struck Harry as an appropriately undramatic day of the week for a dramatic event. He dressed in robes he'd bought specifically for the occasion, deep green, formal, the noble house seal of House Potter worked into the collar, deliberately simple otherwise. Hermione had suggested something more elaborate and he declined with the observation that he wasn't trying to impress anyone, he was trying to be taken seriously, and the 2 things required different clothes. She'd conceded the point with the expression of someone who hated conceding fashion points but acknowledged the logic. They arrived at the ministry in a group, Harry, Sirius, Hermione, Ron, Neville, Augusta. Griphook was already inside, having arrived earlier to coordinate with the registry officials and ensure the evidentiary record was properly submitted and available. Amelia Bones was inside. Marchbanks was inside. The Wisengamot was convening at 10. The atrium of the ministry was, as always, busy and loud with the self-important movement of people who worked in a place where important things happened. Harry walked through it, and this time people looked. Not with the bewildered double-take of someone who'd spotted a celebrity, but with the different quality of people who were looking at something they hadn't fully understood yet and were in the process of understanding it. He walked through the atrium without stopping. In the elevator, descending to the Wisengamot chamber level, Ron said quietly, "Ready?" "Yes," Harry said. "Good speech prepared?" "I don't do speeches." "I know. I was asking if you had one anyway." "I have notes," Hermione said, from his other side. She always had notes. The notes were good. The Wisengamot chamber was a circular room that Harry had been in once before, as a 15-year-old in a disciplinary hearing, surrounded by hostile faces. He remembered the feeling of that room, the cold deliberate weight of institutional power arranged against one person. He remembered sitting in the chair with the chains and thinking that the building and the room and the people in it were all designed to make you feel small. He did not feel small today. The chamber was full, every seat occupied, the 51 noble house members in their designated places, the appointed members filling the tiered rows, faces in the gallery above. Harry took his place on the floor, not the chair in the center, which was for defendants. He stood, because the Lord of Seven Houses was not a defendant here, and Griphook had confirmed the procedural right to stand. His seats were empty. All 7 of them, distributed through the noble house section, marked with the house seals that the registry had updated following the claiming. Harry would not be sitting in them today. That wasn't what today was for. Today was for the room to understand what they meant. Marchbanks was in the Chief Warlock's chair, which was where she should have been for years. She called the session with the calm authority of someone who had been waiting for the right moment and recognized it. Harry presented the evidence. He did it the way he'd prepared it with Hermione, not as a speech, not as a performance, but as a sequence of facts. He started with the audit. He walked through the power of attorney, the suppressed designations, the intercepted mail, the redirected income. He walked through Augusta's documentation, through Margaret Firth's sworn statement, through Griphook's 31 years of institutional record. Each time he reached a significant finding, he handed the relevant document to the registry officer for distribution to the seated members, so they could follow the evidence in their own hands as he described it. He was not angry. Not here, not in this room. What he was, and what the room seemed to feel, because the chamber was very quiet in a way that Wisengamot chambers usually weren't, was simply clear. The facts were the facts. He was not asking anyone to hate Dumbledore. He was not asking anyone to forgive him. He was asking them to look at the evidence and make a decision about what kind of institution they wanted to be. When he reached the section on the shadow figure, on the murders of Charles and Doria Potter, on the magical trace that identified the perpetrator, he named them. The name went through the chamber the way a stone goes through still water. The ripple effect was immediate and visible, heads turning, voices starting and stopping, the particular collective physical response of a large group of people receiving information that reconfigures their understanding. Bones was on her feet within 30 seconds. She made a motion for immediate preventative custody. The motion required a vote. The vote ran through the noble house members in their seats. Harry watched the tally board. The preventative custody motion needed a simple majority. It got 2/3. It got the 4 swing votes Marchbanks had identified on Augusta's schematic. It got several votes from people Harry had not expected, whose decision to vote this way was its own story about what they'd been carrying and what it meant to finally have the evidence to act. Bones had her officers at the ready. The shadow figure was in the ministry building, they'd checked. They were escorted from the building within 20 minutes of the vote. The chamber was loud now, the way it usually was, voices and argument and the procedural machinery of institutional reckoning grinding into motion. Marchbanks managed it with the firm competence of 9 decades, bringing order when necessary and allowing controlled noise when the noise was productive. Augusta, in the noble house section, was still and upright and watching everything. Harry stood on the floor of the chamber and let it happen around him. He thought about Dumbledore, who was not in the room, who had agreed, as part of the cooperation, to be absent from the session and let the evidence speak without his presence to influence the room's response. He would be called to give testimony at a subsequent session. His positions, Chief Warlock, Hogwarts Headmaster, were suspended pending the investigation's formal completion. The suspension had been agreed in advance with Bones. McGonagall was going to be extraordinary as headmistress, Harry thought. He'd told her so yesterday and she'd looked at him as if he were being impertinent, which probably meant she agreed. Neville was standing beside him now, having moved from the gallery during the proceedings. He was watching the tally board with the expression of someone completing a very long equation and finding the answer correct. His hands were loose at his sides. Harry looked at him. "Okay," he said quietly. "Getting there," Neville said. "Your parents, Bones has the files," Neville said. "The Lestranges are in Azkaban. But there may be." Dumbledore's cooperation included information about the night of the attack, additional witnesses who were suppressed. He paused. "It won't bring them back. But it might clarify things. Give Gran what she needs to pursue the full story." He looked at Harry. "You did that. Getting Dumbledore to cooperate. That's what made it possible." "You waited 15 years, Harry said. "I showed up with good paperwork." Neville's mouth twitched. "Excellent paperwork," he said. "Don't undersell it." Hermione appeared at Harry's other shoulder. She was watching the proceedings with the expression of someone who had spent 6 days preparing this presentation and was watching it land exactly as prepared and feeling the particular satisfaction of a thing done correctly. "The shadow figure's removal happened faster than I expected," she said. "Bones was ready," Harry said. "She was. She's very good." A pause. "Harry, the 7 seats, you'll need to take them properly at the next formal session. That means learning the parliamentary procedure for all 7 house designations, each of which has slightly different." Hermione. "What?" "Thank you," he said. She looked at him. "For all of it," he said. "I know the past 3 weeks have been, not easy. I know what it cost you to follow the evidence where it went." Hermione was quiet for a moment. The chamber noise continued around them, the reckoning in motion. She looked at the proceedings with bright, resolved eyes. "I keep thinking about something you said," she said. "In the first meeting. That Dumbledore isn't a villain. He's a man who decided the rules didn't apply to him because he was certain enough he was right." She paused. "I've spent 6 years being certain enough I was right that I've been." She stopped. Started again differently. "I think I understand it better now than I want to." "That's different," Harry said. "You being certain and Dumbledore being certain are different." "How?" "Because when you're wrong, you change," he said simply. "You found the audit and you followed it. You didn't look for a reason not to. That's the difference." She considered this for a moment, then nodded, a single, precise nod that was her version of accepting something as true. Ron had come to stand with them, because Ron always found his way back to them eventually, with the reliable gravity of someone who was simply where he was supposed to be. He looked at the chamber, at the proceedings, at the tally board showing the vote results. "So," he said. "We've claimed 7 lordships, frozen a bunch of accounts, recovered the most powerful wand in the world, uncovered a conspiracy, gotten a confession, started 2 official investigations, and triggered a generational reckoning in wizarding society." He paused. "All in 3 weeks. 23 days, Hermione said. "Are we going to talk about Voldemort at some point?" Ron said, because he's still out there. Yes, Harry said. We are. Just checking. We have a lot to do, Harry said. The Horcruxes are the next thing. Dumbledore's cooperation includes everything he knows about them, which is apparently more than he'd shared before. We have resources now, real ones. Legal standing, political standing, financial standing. He paused. We're not doing it the way he planned. We're not doing it alone, running from place to place hoping we figure it out before we die. We're doing it properly. With people. With preparation. Like this, Ron said, gesturing at the chamber. Like this, Harry agreed. The session ran until 2 in the afternoon. When it concluded, the formal resolutions passed, the investigation fully opened, the preventative custody confirmed, the suspended positions noted in the public record. Harry walked through the ministry atrium for the second time that day, and the quality of the looks he received was different again. The Wizarding World's relationship with Harry Potter had been, for 16 years, one of projection. The boy who lived. The chosen one. The symbol, the story, the face on the prophecy. It had been Dumbledore's management of that projection that had kept him defined by it, kept him the boy in the story rather than the person making his own. The looks in the atrium now were different. Not worshipful, Harry had never wanted that, and the new quality was nothing like it. They were the looks of people reassessing. Of people who had been given a story about someone and were encountering the actual person and finding the person more complex and more interesting and more real than the story had allowed. Harry walked through it and it didn't land on him the way it used to. He wasn't performing indifference and he wasn't performing confidence. He was simply walking through a room full of people on his way to the people he actually cared about. They were waiting outside, Sirius and Augusta and Neville, who had left the chamber floor when the formal portions ended, standing in the afternoon sun outside the phone box entrance. Sirius looked at him when he came out. Done, he said. For today, Harry said. Good. Sirius put an arm briefly around his shoulder. Your grandmother would have been proud, you know. Doria. She would have. He stopped, worked through something. She would have been absolutely insufferable about it, actually. In the best way. The Potters are very bad at being gracious about things they've earned. I get that from my dad. Harry said. Both sides, Sirius said. Your mum wasn't gracious either. She was too pleased with herself every time she was right to bother with gracious. She was right a lot, Harry said. Constantly, Sirius agreed. It was deeply annoying. Augusta was looking at Harry with the particular expression she'd been wearing more frequently over the past weeks, not the severe assessment of their first meeting, not the careful strategic calculation of the planning sessions. Something warmer. Recognizing something. Your grandmother would have liked you, she said. It was not a casual observation. With Augusta, nothing was casual. Doria was. She was fierce and she was principled and she didn't let anyone tell her what she was. She paused. She would have liked this. All of it. The 7 houses and the Wisengamot and the fact that you walked in there at 17 and laid it all out without, she stopped. Without making it about them. That was the right instinct. To make it about the facts rather than the feeling. I had a lot of people helping me get there, Harry said. She gave him the short decisive nod that was her version of warmth. Neville said, what happens to Dumbledore? It was the question they'd all been carrying, the one that didn't have a clean answer. Harry thought about it for a moment, standing in the August sunshine outside the ministry, in the city that had no idea what was happening inside its own invisible layers. The investigation will determine the formal consequences, Harry said. I think he loses the positions permanently. Hogwarts, the Wisengamot. I think the financial penalties will be significant, given the redirected estate income. He paused. Whether it goes further, whether Bones decides the criminal case is worth pursuing, that's not mine to control. I said what I think it should be. He cooperated, he told the truth, he gave us the shadow figure. That counts for something. Does it count for enough? Neville said. Harry thought about it honestly. I don't know, he said. That's the truth. I don't know what enough is in a situation this complicated. I'm not sure anyone does. Neville nodded slowly. What I do know, Harry said, is that whatever happens to him next happens in the open. In front of the Wizengamot, with the evidence on the table, with people who are trying to make a fair decision rather than a convenient one. That's the best we can do. He looked at Neville directly. For your parents, the additional witnesses Dumbledore named, the information about the attack night. Bones is going to pursue that as a separate matter. Completely separate from the estate case. It won't get lost in the bigger proceeding. Neville looked at him for a moment. Thank you, he said. I mean it, Harry said. That one matters. I know you mean it, Neville said. That's why I said thank you. Hermione and Ron came out through the phone box a moment later. Hermione had her folder still tucked under her arm and the expression of someone who had finished a very large piece of work and was already thinking about what the next very large piece of work looked like. Ron had somehow acquired a sandwich, which was impressively resourceful given that they'd been in a Wizengamot session. He looked at Harry. Voldemort, he said. Voldemort, Harry confirmed. Starting when? Starting when we've had a week, Harry said. 7 days. Eat something, sleep, let everything from the last 3 weeks settle. And then we sit down with Dumbledore's full information on the Horcruxes and we build a proper plan. A proper plan, Ron said, with the satisfaction of someone who had always suspected that proper planning was the answer and had spent 6 years wishing the adventure would slow down long enough to do it. I like that. I thought you would, Harry said. Hermione looked at the Elder Wand, visible at Harry's side, and then at his face. The Horcrux in you, she said, quietly, because Hermione always said the thing that needed saying even when no one else wanted to. We're going to have to deal with that. Yes, Harry said. We are. Do you know how? Not yet, he said. But I know it's possible. Dumbledore had a theory, he's going to explain it fully this week. And I think, he paused. I think when the time comes, the Emery's magic will be part of it. The trial told me things. Not explicitly. But I understood something about the connection between life and sacrifice that I didn't understand before. He looked at Hermione steadily. I don't have to die for it. That's the part Dumbledore never told me, because his plan required me not to know it until the last possible moment. He paused. There's another way. I'm going to find it. Hermione held his gaze. Then she said, we're going to find it, with the quiet precision of a correction that was also a commitment. We're going to find it, Harry agreed. Ron finished the sandwich. Right, he said. Week off. Then Horcruxes. Then presumably at some point a final confrontation with the darkest wizard in a century. Probably, Harry said. Good, Ron said. I just wanted to confirm the schedule. He paused. Where are we going for this week off? Because Grimmauld Place is fine but it smells like history. We can use one of the other estate properties, Sirius said, with the slightly incredulous enjoyment of a man who had just had 7 houses worth of property restored to his godson. Harry, you have a house in Cornwall. Did you know that? I did not know that, Harry said. Apparently your grandparents used it in summer. It's been maintained by the estate. Sirius's expression was complicated and warm and resolving slowly into something easier. It has a garden. And it's on the coast. Harry thought about a house in Cornwall that his grandparents had used in summer, that had been sitting properly maintained for 40 years, waiting. A house that was his. Cornwall, he said. The August afternoon had gone gold around them, London doing its best impression of somewhere lovely. They walked away from the ministry together, the 7 of them, moving through the city in the easy way of people who had been through something difficult and significant and come out the other side. Harry felt the 7 houses in him the way you feel a settled thing, not as weight, not as pressure, but as dimension. More of himself available than there had been before. The long suppression lifted, the full scope of what he was finally uncontained. He thought about Lily Evans, who had been a Gaunt and not known it. Who had been Merlin's heir and a founder's descendant and had walked through the world as a clever woman from Cokeworth who loved her son and had no patience for pretension. Who had given her life in an act of love so fundamental that the magic of it had bent a prophecy and saved the world, and had done it not because she knew what she was but simply because she was who she was. He thought he understood her now, in a way the trial had given him that he couldn't have reached otherwise. The inheritance wasn't the point. It had never been the point. The blood and the houses and the 7 seals were just the record, the accounting of something that was already true in a different way, the way his mother's love had been true in a way that didn't require documentation. He was who he was. That had always been enough. That had, in the end, been everything. On the 1st of September, the Hogwarts Express departed from platform 9 3/4 at precisely 11 in the morning, carrying its cargo of students back to a school with a new headmistress and a history that was going to require some revision in the textbooks. Harry was not on it. He was sitting on the steps of a house in Cornwall with the sea below him and a mug of tea that he was actually drinking while it was still hot, which was an improvement on Sirius's approach. The house was old and honey-colored like Augusta's, with a garden that someone had been maintaining with quiet dedication, and from the steps you could see the Atlantic coming in over the rocks in long green-gray swells. Hermione was inside with books. Ron was somewhere in the house arguing with Sirius about Quidditch. Neville was in the garden, which had turned out to contain several interesting plants that had kept him happily occupied for 3 days and shown a side of him that Augusta, watching from the kitchen window, had observed was his father's quality exactly. Augusta herself was in the sitting room reading with the contained satisfaction of someone who had set down a very long burden and was learning how rest felt. Harry sat on the steps with the Elder Wand loose in his fingers and his Holly Wand in his jacket and the sea moving below him and thought about what came next. Not anxiously. Not with the particular weight that what comes next had always carried before, the sense of things being arranged for him, of a future he hadn't chosen bearing down. Just thinking. Considering. The way you consider things when they're yours to decide. Voldemort was out there. The Horcruxes needed finding and destroying. The Shadow Figure's investigation would continue through the autumn and produce its own complications. The Wisengamot session had set wheels turning that would keep turning for years. There was so much still to do. Harry looked at the sea. He thought about something Augusta had said on that first day in Yorkshire, when she'd pulled out the wooden box that had been sitting on her side table for 31 years. When someone with the standing to act finally appeared, would have something to give them. He'd been that person. Not because of the 7 houses or the Elder Wand or the Emery's trial or any of the things that had been suppressed and recovered and claimed over the past 3 weeks. Those things were real and they mattered and he would use them well. But the standing that had made him the right person for this was older than the audit and simpler than the law. He'd been the person willing to look at the ledger honestly. To read the uncomfortable thing and not look away. To follow the evidence where it went even when where it went was somewhere painful. To build something real instead of performing something impressive. His mother would have done the same thing, he thought. Exactly the same thing. He sat on the steps in the September morning with the sea moving below and all of it ahead, the fight and the reckoning and the long work of remaking what needed remaking, and he felt, in his chest, the settled certainty of someone who is exactly where they should be, doing exactly what they should be doing, entirely themselves. The Elder Wand was warm in his fingers. The sea came in over the rocks. Harry Potter, Lord of 7 Houses, son of James and Lily, heir of Merlin, Sirius's ward and Hermione's best work and Ron's oldest friend, picked up his tea and drank it while it was still warm, and let the world be exactly what it was.